first I want to talk about the digital celebration that we're all part of today, which is World IA Day, or WIAD for short. And this is an event that's happening all over the world, which is pretty cool. And this happens annually around this time of year. We are one of 50 locations that's celebrating information architecture today, so really neat. We do have a keynote by Cassini, but we're going to share that link in the chat. Lana's going to throw that link in the chat for the keynote because it's about 20 minutes. It's really good, but we're not going to devote time in this workshop today to watch that. So we're just going to share that link with you now so that you can watch it on your own time. I also want to thank our global sponsors. Pepper's making an appearance. I want to thank some local sponsors or global sponsors, particularly our platinum sponsor, Axure, and Optimal Workshop. And Optimal is a tool that I'm going to be talking about a lot today in the workshop. So I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with that, but I'm a huge fan of Optimal and just want to have a huge shout out to them for supporting World IA Day, and thankful for all of our sponsors for this event. So there is a swag bag for you lovely attendees today. And we're going to put the link in the chat for that as well. I guess you click on this link. I haven't done it myself. And these are the discounts that you get in some free stuff for attending World IA Day. This is the global celebration swag bag. There's also some prizes that Optimal's giving out, and Abby Covert's book, How to Make Sense of Any Mess. She's giving out some autographed copies. There's also some local raffle prizes. And let me tell you quickly about those. You get an ebook bundle from Rosenfeld Media, a team subscription to Axure RP, and one ebook for How to Make Sense of Any Mess. Now, since those are a raffle, it means you have to work for it a little bit. And what that means is you got to share your experience of World IA Day on social media. So that will be the way that you get to be enrolled in the local prizes, which is the ebook from Rosenfeld and Abby Covert and Axure RP, which is a pretty cool prize. So if you tweet, post on LinkedIn, post on Facebook, post on Instagram, use the hashtag UXRS, which is UX Research Strategy, short, UXRS, and our board and volunteers will pick the best social media post from today and let you know that you've won a prize. So we like to spread the word, and that's how we're going to share the local prizes today, is when you share your experience with the world on your social media platforms. So here are the hashtags that you could use today to promote World IA Day, World IA Day, World IA Day 21, and UXRS is what I'm going to be looking for the raffle prizes. Quick shout out. You might want to take a screen grab of this. This is our social media. And this is where you can post. You can either tag us by our name. Please follow us on these social media. That would be awesome too. You can either tag us by our name or use that hashtag and we'll find you. You've got 24 hours from the end of today's workshop to post your social media to be entered in the drawing. And Lauren's putting in the direct links into the chat, so that's a little easier too for you to connect to us on those social media platforms as well. And has anybody here attended a UX Research Strategy event? Thumbs up in the chat, or I mean in the video or the reactions. If you've ever attended, you know that we really value your feedback and we want you to help us make our events better. So if you could, please fill out the survey. We'll throw that in at the end of the workshop and let us know how we did and let us know how we can be better, because your feedback's really important to us. So survey. All right, so now, without further ado, we got through all the announcements. Let's get started on the workshop. Whew, I'm already tired. No, I'm kidding. All right. Can you see my screen? Thumbs up. Everybody see it? Anybody see it? Excellent. All right, so we're here today to talk about testing for information architecture. So if this is not the right workshop for you, you might want to go now. No, just kidding. Everybody should be here and we're excited to have you. So let's go through the agenda. First, we're going to start with a baseline and a definition of what information architecture is. I'm also going to call it IA and taxonomy. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. So when I say IA or taxonomy, I'm talking about the same thing. Then we're going to talk about how it relates to UX design and research. Then I'm going to take a deep dive into the methods that we use to test and validate IA. I'm going to talk about how to do them, the pros and cons of them, and how each method can get you closer to defining a stronger information architecture. We're going to sprinkle in some activities along the way. And then I'm going to wrap up with some takeaways and some resources. And finally, we're going to take some questions that you might have at the end. So again, since I'm not going to be watching the chat super closely, if you want to save your questions for the breaks or the end, that would be awesome. But you can also put them in the chat. We'll be collecting them along the way. All right, so let's get going. First, let me tell you very briefly about me. My name is Jen Blatz, and I'm a user experience researcher and designer at Fidelity in the United States. I also co-founded UX Research and Strategy, the meetup that is here hosting World IA Day for the Dallas instance. And hopefully you can, if we haven't connected to the group, or if you haven't connected to me on LinkedIn yet, please do so. We're in both places. And I'm also going to now introduce or pass it over to Lana, who's also helping me with the workshop today.
Hi, I'm Lana Gibbons. I'm a UX content strategist. I also am at Fidelity, where I wear a couple of UX content hats and focus on internal enterprise information and tools. Okay, enough about us. Let's get started. So first up, we're going to start with a short getting to know you activity. And using the virtual whiteboard tool Mural, spelled M-U-R-A-L. This will give us a chance to practice using it. In the Zoom chat, I've shared the Mural link with you. So go ahead and open Mural now, please. And I will share my screen.
Let us know if you have any issues getting into the Mural.
All right, we seem to all be coming in here. Okay. Slowly but surely, everybody's getting in there. I'm just going to go ahead and explain what we're going to be doing here. So first off, with a thumbs up, who has experience using Mural or any digital whiteboarding tool before? Get a few people. Awesome. Okay. Well, so Mural is pretty simple to use, but we're here to help you if you have any confusion or needed any help with that. So on our welcome board, you can see where in the world at the top. And some of you are already starting to do this, so thank you. Below the map are several different color stickies. And you go ahead and grab one of those, drag it to a place on the map that you'd like to answer the question, where in the world do you want to go, but have not been to yet? Be sure to put your name and the location on your sticky, and we'll take a minute or two to let everybody get their sticky and pick it up on the map.
For those who say you might need to sign in, I'm going to try an alternate link, see if this is any better. I'm not sure. You might need to quickly create a Mural account.
And it's like as simple as an email address and a quick password. It should be pretty fast. Most of us seem to be in there. To the folks who are having connection problems, are you having connection problems to the Mural itself? Or just internet? Yes, mural. Okay.
So again, you might just need to, is it slow to connect a mural, or is it because it's asking you for a password or a log, you might have to create an account. And it could be that, okay, sorry if it's just mural. I wish we had some control over that, but unfortunately we do not. So we'll just kind of
Starting
wait.
to be okay. Yeah.
Okay. How do we feel? Are we to a point pretty close to where we could? Visiting go. Oh, I know. Mural has some pretty funny names, don't they? I'm sorry, Mike, that you're frustrated. Let's go ahead, Lana.
Yep. Okay, well, I apologize for some of the frustrations, but we've got the majority of folks in here now. So for those of you who are still working at it, don't worry, you have some time to get yourself set up. Also, while we're here or later in the talk, if you'd like to share your contact information with the group, go ahead and move down to those yellow stickies right below that color block of stickies, and put your information in there. And if you'd like to take a screenshot to capture those at some point during the talk, that's totally fine. Jen and I would also love to stay connected with you in the future. And if you'd want to go ahead and come off mute, if you'd like to share where you chose to go and why. We'll take a couple minutes and a couple answers.
My husband and I have a 50 states goal. So we live in Texas, but we have 33 of 50 states completed toward our journey. And once we check those off, our next goal is Europe. So I put down Iceland because I want to see the Northern Lights and everything else. And that is eventually on the list, but it's going to take us a few more years to get to those 50 states.
That's awesome. Thank you. Anyone else would like to share where you would go and why?
Mine's a similar kind of reason. So mine's the one way down there at the bottom of South Antarctica. Because I decided to put my COVID canceled trip on there. Theoretically, I was supposed to be on a cruise back this December, I think. Because I have a goal similarly for all continents before I'm 30. So slower going than it should be this last year, but we'll get there eventually.
Crossing my fingers for you. That sounds awesome. I think we have time. You want to take just one more?
Sure.
All right.
My husband and I would love to go to Japan, and it's been a dream of us for a long time. And this year I gave him an experience from Amazon in which we went to one of the towns in Japan, and it was a great experience to just kind of like be walking with a random person with their phone, and it was just kind of like walking us through the streets of Japan. So it was good.
That's pretty cool. Awesome. Okay, great.
Cool.
Well,
Great.
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all for sharing. Back to you.
Great stuff. Thank you. Again, as Lana mentioned, if you would love to connect with others in the group, fill in one of these yellow stickies down below. And I'm going to say that if you don't feel like taking notes today and you want a copy of the slide deck, include your email on that, and I will send you a copy of the slide deck so that you don't have to take extensive notes today. So that's totally your call, but want to give you that option of having me email you the deck. So everybody can see my screen? Thumbs up if anybody can see it. All right, excellent. Thank you so much. So first, let's level set. with a definition of taxonomy, which is another word for information architecture. So Wikipedia states that it is the art and science of organizing and labeling websites, intranets, online communities, and software to support findability and usability. In other words, it's not taxidermy, which is the stuffing of dead animals so that you can display them on your wall or your shelves. The Information Architect Institute says that information architecture is the practice of deciding how to arrange the parts of something to be understandable. And I like this definition a little bit better because it goes beyond just websites and digital products. I would say that IA is like the foundation or a blueprint of a house. You need to know where the rooms are. You need to know where they are before you start putting up the wallpaper on the walls because those aren't built yet. So you need to know what type of rooms they are before you can put the wallpaper on the walls, right? So generally, a person structuring the IA has a goal to help users complete tasks or find information, or maybe both. As a UX professional, I want to provide a good experience and make sure things are findable. So you need good IA to guide the user through that experience. So let's go through some examples. Taxonomy can be applied to navigation on a website. Notice how the items are organized and labeled and how they're being displayed here in this navigation, which is probably the most common form of information architecture that most of us think of when we hear that term. Even the organization of a grocery store is a form of taxonomy. Think about the last time you were in a grocery store or a market. Were the things organized in a logical way to you? Was the sugar in the baking aisle? Even the footer on a page has organization to it. And we want to ensure that how UX pros organize things makes sense to users. All of this type of content should be tested with users to ensure that it makes sense to people coming to your site or your application. Even when a site has a product comparison, like you see here, the way the descriptions are structured would be considered a form of information architecture. So let's switch a little bit and talk about how IA relates to other disciplines like user experience in general and user research. IA is often overlooked, kind of like how UX design is sometimes overlooked until it's bad. Then you notice it. When organizing something, you are creating an IA. And when you organize elements on a page, you are creating the UX design of that page. So kind of see the similarities? Like user research, information architecture is a part or a discipline that falls under the UX umbrella. You don't have to have good visual design skills to define a taxonomy. It does help, however, to be able to conduct unbiased user research to define a good information architecture. A UX designer can and should be involved in the IA and helping to define it. Having that context as to why users expect a product or site to be organized in a particular manner will help you, if you're a UX designer, to build better experiences. So who here, either with a thumbs up or the reaction, has heard the term a mental model? Is anybody familiar with that term? Some people have heard it. Excellent. So your ultimate goal as a UX designer or researcher, or maybe you're a product partner, is to make sure that through testing, the information architecture and the structure of your site or your product match the user's mental model. And when I say mental model, I basically mean a person's ideas or their expectations. In other words, people who create a taxonomy should understand the context of your users and their expectations. UX research can help identify those expectations or why people think the way that they do. For example, do not show your company's organization chart as your information architecture. I've seen this quite a lot in companies. And the reason why I say don't do that is because it's not good information architecture. Users don't care about your org chart. They have something in mind. So make sure that the way you organize information makes sense to them. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how things can be organized in many different ways. So let's look at this. We're going to look at this fruit example, but first, I want to do a fun poll. And I want you to think about this fruit that you see here on the screen. We're going to bring up a poll. Lana's bringing it up now, and we're going to pick what category you think this fruit would fit in. So take a minute to select what category. Is it citrus, basic, tropical, yellow, or you don't know what it is? So let's take a minute and fill in this poll and see what people think this is. Getting pretty close. Got almost everybody. All right, let's go ahead and call that. So let's go ahead and share the results. It looks like tropical was the winner for most of the people here on the workshop. But as you can see, some people picked basic and some people picked yellow. So I'm going to show you some examples of the way that this fruit could be potentially organized. So maybe fruits could be organized by the fruit color, the color of the fruit on the inside. Maybe they're organized by where they come from. Maybe they're organized by the shape of the fruit. See the categories here? We have round, we have oval, we have kind of funky shaped fruits or a variety of shapes. Or maybe it's organized by their skin, whether you eat the skin or not. So as you can see, maybe you would have organized these fruits in a different way if given the option. And this is why we test with our users to help determine what the information architecture of our product or site would be. And that's why we're here today. So this workshop is to talk about the methods that you could use to identify and to test your information architecture to make sure it works for users. Plain and simple. Okay, so let's talk about how you can go about identifying the IA. There are a few methods one can use to build toward and test a good information architecture. And some of the testing methods include a card sort, a tree jack test, and a usability test with a prototype. And these are the methods we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with taking a deep dive into the most common method, which is a card sort. And a card sort is when you get the participant to organize topics in a way that makes sense to them. Like the fruit example, people will organize things in different ways based on how they expect things to be in their mind. But before we go into the deep dive of card sorting, we have another activity. So we're going to do an open card sort, and we're going to be working in pairs. So each of you, 2 people. So let's define an open card sort for a second. That is when the person who is giving the test, whether UX designer or researcher, they provide the topics, but they do not provide the categories or these predefined buckets that the topics go in. So first the participant makes groups, then they name each group in a way that describes or labels those groups. So for this activity, we have the cards for you to start, but one of you needs to organize them into groups and then give them a label that you think that group should be called. Does that make sense so far? Pretty simple. Thumbs up or in reaction or video? Cool. Okay, so also this is going to be a moderated card sort. So let's define what that means. A moderated card sort is when you conduct the card sort while watching the participant. And this is really valuable because you get some of that context and the reasons why they're creating the groups. So for this activity, one person's going to moderate the card sort by gathering insights and the why behind the things, why they're organizing the things that they are. And then the other person is going to organize the cards into categories and give them some labels. So what we're going to organize today is we're going to be sorting some vegetables. So let me lay out what we're going to do, give you the instructions. We're going to put you into Zoom breakout rooms, and there's going to be 2 people in each room. So you're going to make a fast friend today, first thing on the go. And we're going to set the timer. This activity will take maybe 20 minutes, maybe less, maybe more, depending on what you need. So between the pair of you, you're going to be in a Zoom breakout room, and you're going to decide who's going to be the moderator and who's going to be the participant organizing the cards. Now, don't spend too much time on this. This is an easy decision. Just pick somebody to do one or the other. No big deal. And you're going to go to the mural board that is the same number as your Zoom breakout room. So if you're in Zoom breakout room 7, you go to the mural board that has breakout room 7 at the top. So that's your working space. So the first 10 minutes or so, you're going to let the participant organize the cards and give the groups that they created some labels or titles. Then when they're done organizing the veggies and giving them labels, you can start the discussion around why they created the groups that they did. And the moderator is going to take maybe 10 minutes or so to ask some follow-up questions. And we'll go through that moderator's guide in a minute to get some context around why they created the groups. So if you get done before the time is up, feel free to go ahead and leave the breakout room and come join us in the lobby again. So for staying on top of time, we will have a timer in mural so that you can see we'll set it for 20 minutes. So we're shooting for the first 10 minutes maximum to kind of organize the cards, put a label on it. The next 10 minutes for the moderator to kind of ask some follow-up questions and get some context around the groups that you created. So here's the moderator's guide. There's a copy of this in your mural breakout room, so you can see it right there when you're working. So this is like just a little mini moderator's guide to help you ask some questions. And as a moderator, you're going to give them these instructions. If you were doing this individually, you would say, ask you to talk out loud as you organize the cards, or they can organize the cards and create the categories and discuss them at the end, whatever they feel most comfortable with. So ask them to create at least 2 groups. It's not very useful if all the cards are all in the same group. So we're going to ask them to at least create 2 groups and at least put 2 cards in every group if they can. Now, the mural has 5 category labels, but I don't want you to feel like you have to create 5 categories. They're just there so that you don't have to create more cards. Just if you feel like there's only 2 categories, it's okay to create 2. If there's more than 5, feel free to create more categories. And as the participant who's creating the groups, the moderator should observe the following. Are they struggling with any topics? Are they kind of not sure where they should put something? Or do they feel like something should be in more than one location, more than one bucket? Are the topics put in a category because they don't know where else to put it? This stuff is really context gold. So you're kind of want to watch for some of these things. And then finally, when they're done, you're going to ask these questions from the moderator's guide. Tell me why you created the categories you did. Why did you give it that label? Why did you group these things together? Just really want a good understanding of why they created the groups that they did. And was there anything that you were unsure about or that you found confusing? And again, learning about this confusing aspect is really important to capture. And it's one of the main reasons why you want to conduct a moderated card sort. This context is gold. So Lana, go ahead and kind of debrief on the instructions again before we get going into the Zoom rooms.
Happy to. So when you are in a breakout room, you're going to do just these things. You're going to go to the mural board that corresponds to your Zoom breakout number. So as Jen said, if you're in breakout room number 7, then you go to mural board number 7. This is where you and your partner will do the card sort. Quickly pick who will be the participant and who will be the moderator. Then start going through the activities, sort the cards and give them labels. Keep it simple, don't overthink it. Then the moderator asks the follow-up questions from the moderator guide to get the context around why the groups are formed and the reasoning behind the labels given to those groups. You can take notes in the orange stickies provided in the mirror board. If you forget, just read right off the moderator's guide. It's no problem. A couple of things you might want to know. Chat only works for the two of you in the breakout room. So if you need us for anything, Jen and I, write a note to Lana or Jen in the green stickies that you'll see in the mural board. Also, make sure you hit the join button when we send you to the breakout room. You have to do this. Zoom will not do it for you. Does anyone have any questions before we go into the breakout rooms? Okay. Let's go, Jen.
All right. I'm going to send you to the rooms. Oops. Oh, let's open all rooms. There we go. Go ahead and hit join.
Hey,
Hi,
I can't hear you. Wait,
can you hear
sorry.
me?
Yep, I'm on the wrong thing.
Okay, did you join?
So I'm on my phone for the audio and I'm on my computer for the video. So I think I got asked to join two different rooms. I'm in room 3,
Right.
but also room 8. So I'm gonna go ahead and just get off my phone. I'm just gonna like close Zoom on my
Okay.
phone. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
If she needs to go to a different breakout room again, you can probably send her phone and computer to the same room with.
Oh, right.
But if
Oh, she was with you, Lauren.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that works out. Looks like everybody's in pairs. Okay, Lana, did you set the timer?
I will set it now. I wanted to make sure everybody was in first.
Yeah,
Does
let's
Chris-
do it. Like,
Chris, to get to a room?
yeah, Chris, can you hear us? Maybe he's just listening. He's got Michaela in there, so that's okay too. We're going to take a break after this, just so you know. So if you see any stickies with some questions, keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. Jen and Lana, real quick, while you're both here, will you smile so I can get a screenshot of both? All right. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Hey, Jen or Lana, there is a question about from room 1. They might be alone in a room. Do we need to either repair them or I jump in there?
I think if they're alone, then Jen's thought was if you could jump in there.
Okay.
I don't know if can you go in there?
You know what? It says I'm assigned to room 8, so I might need Jen to
Stick you in there?
put me, unless you have access to do that.
I don't.
Okay. Let me just call Jen really quick. Oh, Michaela, are you able to join different rooms? It looks like we need someone else in room 1. But let me call Jen.
I was there in
Hi,
that
I'm
room.
here.
There was nobody else.
Oh, okay. So you were just by yourself then?
Yeah, that's
So
why
that
I
was
came.
that was your sticky that says anybody else in room 1?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I-
Then we're good.
So I guess I was the odd out.
Yeah, I think maybe Chris was supposed to be you because there are an even for people here. 32.
Do you need me to go to any other room? Okay.
We're just going to sit here and wait till they complete the activity. So we're good. Thank you.
No problem.
And Jen, when people do have questions and we need to hop in, I don't know how I can manually go into rooms because when I click join breakout room, it just puts me in the original room that I was supposed to be in. So we might need you to manually assign us.
Will do. I can see how to do it.
So do the rest of the participants, they only see the room or they see everybody else? The
They can
mural.
see the whole mural.
Okay.
Yeah.
All these people in the room is causing this massive delay in in me looking at the mural and zooming in and zooming out. It's like just stalling.
Yeah, I thought it was maybe my internet, but
I thought it was too myself, but no.
which is weird because at work we do murals with so many people and it's never a problem like this. So who knows? Maybe World IA Day, everybody's doing a mural and crashing it.
It could be.
Our mural's taking Saturday off. Like, nope.
So do you guys use this a lot when you're doing studies?
I do.
Yeah.
I do it a lot for analysis.
I'm just a little bit. I'll use it here and there. I won't do it as extensively as Jen does. But like when we're doing like site IA, it's a lot easier to kind of do it out on a mural than it is to do it in any other program because you can visually see it and stack things differently and it's nice.
I use it a lot, just even for personal projects for work, like because I don't have my whiteboard anymore. And so like when I'm trying to create like a slide deck or something, like a presentation, I'll do like a photo deck in there first.
Actually, I think it's a good visualization tool, particularly for stakeholders, so they can see how people are going back and forth and organizing things, so they can see that's not what this is an empathy tool more than anything. For analysis, get a little tricky for if you want to count things and all that, it's a little harder, but
yeah.
We do some of these exercises more of a using survey tool, card sorting capabilities. So it's dragging, drop and drag and drop exercises that help it.
Yeah. I found that it's so useful to use for brainstorming, especially with like a lot of like business partners where they're you just want them to collect and have a conversation. It works really well for that.
Yeah. But when you have a large group and then you need to do the analysis, it gets like,
yeah, you end up making a separate board that they don't have access to. Just full of
yeah. Well, if you want to go to a larger sample, then just a few users, that gets a little harder. And we have a lot of categories too. I do more quant than many times. I want to many times. And so that's why I was looking for tools where I can get it together quickly, quantitatively.
Have you used Airtable, Michaela? Because we use a lot of Airtable, especially if there's like a mix of qual and quant.
Airtable, I heard the name, but I have not used them.
It's really awesome. It's almost like a mix between like Sheets and like Trello. I don't know if that's a good example, but like you can create cards with like a bunch of different information, but it's almost like it puts it into like a spreadsheet too, so you can do different calculations. It's a very cool tool.
Okay, I'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Since people can have the hang of it, no questions yet.
That's good.
It's pretty intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You don't want to take for granted that people know how to use these tools. So that's why we bill out as much as we could so that they can just kind of click and fill it in. But there are people who haven't used it. So we, you know, want to be sensitive to that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw the message. I sent out a broadcast message that we're about halfway through. Looks like they're probably moderating now.
Where do you see the messages?
You see them they're like a pop-up above your screen. They might just be in the breakout rooms. I'm not sure.
No, it just flashed up at the top of the screen too. Yeah.
So they write them inside Mural?
No, I wrote one to everyone.
Oh.
Everyone look up at your camera. I'm going to take a volunteer photo. Do one more. I'm sure mine and Lauren's eyes are closed. Knowing us. And Pepper too. Pepper put her hand up.
Does Pepper want to get in it?
Okay.
I tried really hard not to blink, but inevitably every time Jen takes a screenshot like that, we're both like,
always. One of us
or
both
delay. There's usually like something between the snap of the picture and the delay. You want to move too soon.
Hi. Welcome back.
Are you guys done?
All done? Cool. Mike, you're muted. There we go.
I think we had a couple interesting things that we thought about, since it was, even though it was moderated, there wasn't a lot of direction that maybe in other exercises that I've done in the past. So sometimes I'm a little bit more, when I run one, I'm a little bit more focused because I have 3 or 4 things that I want to accomplish. Whereas here, it's just, it seems like, you know, we're going through this exercise just to see how people think more than we have a goal in mind.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And one of the things that came up was we didn't know what a Kumara is, so it was hard to organize it. And then the question was, well, do we go to Google and look it up, or do we just put that aside? Because in different type of moderated sessions, you may want to say, yep, you can go, or you may want to say no. We want you to take that information as much as you know and make those determinations, because it's not going to be vegetables per se, but it would be an industry term, or what we think is an industry term. And we want to see how many people actually know what that means.
Haha, Mike, you're falling into my plan. Yes, good points. And we are going to talk about that when we get everyone back, because
All right,
that's a very legitimate point. Absolutely.
I noticed that when I try to organize a navigation, I did one for a telecommunications company, and there were things that I thought were so obvious that it should be a certain way in a certain order. And there were times in which of the vast majority showed it should be in a different order. And I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense, but that's how 80% of the participants think. And so we had to rethink our direction based on, yeah, this is what the data is showing us. It may not make sense, but this is how people think of it. So that's what we're going for. And it certainly helped the results and us obtaining our goals of a better organization for the navigation.
Yeah. That is very interesting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Is sometimes people do create groups that you're like, oh, didn't think about that. That's very interesting.
I've done unmoderated searches or card sorts, and I've had a couple people put everything in one column because we didn't tell them to make at least 2 or more columns, but most people came up with multiple columns. So that was interesting too, that you would think that people would know that, but obviously there are some people that have never done this before and they need a little bit more help, especially if you're going to keep it unmoderated.
Exactly. Yeah, I've seen that too, for sure.
We did run into a problem as we were trying to update the cards, that it seemed to either have a lag or it just didn't update, or we weren't able to do it temporarily and then it worked. So I don't know if that's something everybody's going through or just us.
I think that some others were feeling a little bit of a struggle, a little bit of a lag as well. I'm not sure if I've been in mural boards with more people than this, so I don't know if it's our internet connection or what it might be. We're not really sure, but Mike, you're right. There were some people feeling a lag.
Yeah. Okay. It's not a big deal, but I would think that if I'm going to try to do it with 100 people concurrently, that we need to, at least I need to understand that that's a potential issue to let folks know, not to be frustrated. This potentially could happen, or it may not happen at all for some of you. Okay.
Right.
Good.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes for those who are still wrapping things up. We've got some activity still happening in mural, and some people are coming back, which is great. Welcome back. We're going to take some time here to talk about when everybody gets back. We're going to talk about what we went through and what we learned. So Mike was talking a little bit about his experience in his breakout room, technical and surprises and otherwise. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about that when everybody gets back. Just a couple minutes.
Jen, if we have some questions about moderation and some principles of card sorting, should we ask them before or after we start to get into this particular card sort?
We can, we're going to have a little bit of a break here after this activity, and we can ask then, We can ask after the activity when we come back. I mean, after the break when we come back, or we can ask at the end, whatever you prefer, Tracy. I'm open to that. Or we could ask now while we're waiting for everybody to continue. I know there's probably several people here on this workshop who have done moderated discussions. So why don't you go ahead and ask?
So with creating these categories, I was the moderator, right? How many times generally can you, I mean, is it only once? Can you do a card sort before like your own moderator bias starts to interfere? Like, so for example, if your participant goes through the process and but the categories don't necessarily aren't consistent, do you ask them to keep going or until it is, or can you, or at one point when things are basically done, do you ask them if you were to do it again, what would you do? Like, what's the general principle? Because if you keep going until you think it's consistent, if you think it's consistent, that's not necessarily the metric. They think it's consistent is the metric, right? So
Correct. Now, when you say consistent, do you mean consistent with what other people had formed across different card
no,
sorts?
like consistent in terms of it's all different. It's all the same level of taxonomy as opposed to differing levels of taxonomy.
Tell me a little bit. I'm trying to make sure I'm answering the correct question. So clarify that for me for a
So
little bit.
like if you start by categorizing it one way and then you change halfway to categorizing it another way, and then like seeing that happen, and do you still keep going or until it's consistent so that it's all one way or the other way? Or
So what you're saying is they started to create some categories or buckets and then they switched midstream, like, oh, actually, I think I want to go this way. And I have seen that happen. And I just kind of let them go with it. Like there's times where they start to see, like once they start seeing holistically, they're like, oh, wait a minute, this is not what I'm thinking at all. I was going to have an orange group and now there's only one fruit that was going to be orange. So let me restructure this in a way that doesn't work that way. And that's okay. Just let them go through and make the changes accordingly to where they're in a final, this is the way I think it would be.
so if at the very end, during like kind of the debrief, they tell you, oh, I wish I could do this again, or like I would have done this instead, do you let them, or do you just like take the comment?
Take the comment and let them walk you through why they would change that. Like record what they have, but also like, okay, great, tell me why you would organize it in a different way. What would that look like? What would be in those buckets? What would that bucket be called? And essentially you would have two card sorts, right? And that's okay. Lauren, do you have something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I've seen this a lot too. I always like to let the user tell me when they're done because that tells me like they've got it in a place where they like it. So I try to be quiet the first time and let them just work through it themselves, and I'll see them go back and forth, and I'll try to make notes so that in the moderated part I can ask them like, what were you thinking when you were changing some things? I always take a picture when they say they're done before they explain it. This is like if I'm with them in the room, obviously. And then if they talk through it, because a lot of times when you go through the moderation, they're like, oh, actually, that doesn't make sense anymore. Let me change it. And like Jen said, you end up with two card sorts. And I always like to document both because, after you do a couple of them, you'll start to hear themes, and maybe the first one is a common theme across 20 different users. And the second one they did is only a theme with like 2 people. So it's still a good data point either way.
I think that also one thing that helps, so you don't have to wait until the end, is if part of the instructions, you ask them to talk out loud as they're doing this, so you can see the train of thought, and you will learn what you might think is inconsistent, and then what's it consistent inside their head? What is that they're going? And you can see if they change midstream as they're thinking, because that's what happens sometimes when you are actually searching for stuff. It's like you're probably not finding, and then you search, and then we look for another criteria. So you can see the transition in the model, in the mental model that's happening. And you sometimes have to, remind them at the beginning, remember, just think out loud as you are doing this. So, we can follow along. the process.
Thank you. So one of my follow-up questions is, what steps do you take to prevent your own bias from determining whether new categories need to be generated or not?
Well, I would say, like to Lauren said, when they say they're done, then you don't need to generate new categories. Then they're done. You should have a pretty good moderate. You let them guide you. Their answers are the way that it is, and you don't want to push them to, well, should you change it, or are you sure? That's the answers. So you're not injecting any bias by just accepting what they are and accepting their answers as to why they did it, and then just clean slate, totally neutral for the next person and see where it goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's a common, this is how I wouldn't bias it, but I just wonder if there's other things that we can do during the debrief, because I don't find the first I'm done difficult. It's more of during the debrief, when things come up, at what point, because at that point I'm moderating the debrief. How do I let my bias, how do I make sure I separate that out, instead of like suggesting a recategorization? I'm not going to suggest that, but sometimes things that you want to prevent from coming out during the debrief, especially when you're walking them through their thought process.
Right. Well, I will say, like, especially if you do a large amount of card sorts, you're going to get a lot of variables and you're going to get a lot of results, a lot of categories, it's not like everybody's going to sit down and do the same thing. So you are going to have to inject, you can call it bias, I guess, but you are going to have to inject some recommendations based on what you've learned, right? You're going to have to kind of say, well, this person created categories of this is what I like and this is what I don't like. Well, that's fine and special, but that's not very good for navigation on our website. So you're going to have to make that call that that's not really going to be helpful for you to help your navigation, and to focus in on those card sorts where it's a practical application of taxonomy.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Sure. So let's go ahead and now that we have everybody back here, I want to take a few minutes to kind of, to Tracy's point, let's debrief and talk about what happened in our breakout rooms and what we learned. So my first question, this is just an open discussion between all of us. You feel free to either look at Lana's screen or look at the mural itself, and we'll kind of zoom in when we're talking. So the first question is, what did you learn? What happened in your card sort, and what did you learn? What were the kind of the results? Anybody want to speak to what happened in their session and what they experienced?
I think for me, it was like how I started the sorting was more like, okay, what do I recognize instantly? And then that kind of like began the train of thought process for me.
So Adrienne, were you the person organizing the cards?
Yes.
Okay. Sure. That's certainly an easy way to get started. I know it can seem overwhelming when you have a whole bunch of things and you're like, oh, where do I begin? That's certainly a way.
I was actually Adrienne's moderator.
Oh, okay.
I was actually going to comment on that one, that was interesting, that even as I was doing the moderating, normally you would in this instance know all of the items in your cards, but even I didn't know what one of them was. So like it was a little bit interesting, and like I can't help identify that for you. So that was a little bit interesting in this exercise version.
So in that case, are you as a moderator supposed to answer a question? Like if there's a term that someone doesn't understand, are you like supposed to give them a definition when they ask, or do you just say, just put it in a category for something that you don't know, or in that case, what do you suggest?
That's a very good question. And I would say, no, you don't tell them where it is. You say, or what that is, because they're not going to have you when they're on your website to ask, what is probably a Kumara, which most people don't know what that is, right? So you're just going to say, well, what do you think it is, or where do you think it would go? You know, boomerang it back to them and ask for their, well, where would you put it?
Do you
Because
sometimes have a picture of the things so that, you know, that helps?
that's true.
Well, and I was gonna say on my side, I work in healthcare, and so like sometimes we deal with like interesting terminology, and sometimes it's a little bit different depending on who you're talking to and what they call it. So like during the actual card sorting activity, don't help them. But then when you're doing that moderated piece afterwards, you can get some clarity, kind of that two sorted versions we were talking about of like tell them what it is or give a description or something, and then see where they would put it now that they know what it is.
I think it's also an interesting insight when people do not know what you're talking about, because a lot of the times, especially if you're in the corporate world, you might have a term that's very obvious to you and your business partners, but regular folks have no clue. And so you need to like, maybe we need to call it something different. And so it is an insight in itself, you know. And so I definitely agree with Jen and others, like treat it like a normal empathy interview session where you're asking open-ended questions and boomeranging it back and taking note when those things happen, because that should make you perk up a little bit.
Yeah, we do that a lot when people say, I don't know what this means or where would I put it. So we ask them, what do you think it means? So boomerang back to them. And put it wherever you think it means. There is no right or wrong answer. So that's, you have to kind of repeat that so they don't feel that they have to, you know, guiding them anywhere, because that what happens, like Jen said, when they are in the wild, nobody's going to help them. So they're going to go by whatever interpretation they have. And so you have to let them, and just, you have to watch very closely your tone when you ask those questions. Your tone of voice would tells, you know, you don't have necessarily the words, but if you say in a particular way, you are injecting bias into how you ask that question.
Yeah. And then
Also,
Aaron, to your point, like, you know, later on you could say, well, here's what it actually means. Like after you're kind of done with your original thing, here's what it means. Like, what would you call that? And then where would it go as kind of a secondary? I like that.
And to what Lauren's saying, record all of that. Record that they didn't know what it was. Record, because just having a screenshot of the card sort might not provide that context still. So record all of that information, that they didn't know what it was. This is what they thought it was. And ultimately, this is where they're going to put it. I saw Nico. Nico, you had your hand up a second ago. Did you have a question or a comment?
I just had a comment. So, yeah, I was thinking that, you know, that's this type of observation of like, oh, the, you know, majority of people didn't know what this even was. That's the type of thing, obviously, that you can take back with you and decide, you know, if you ask that question, what would you call it? And you get something that a lot of people are answering, you can change it to that label for future card sorts. Like maybe you want to run a closed card sort once you have some categories that seem to make sense. And then try to get feedback on the new terminology that you ended up using, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Ashwini, you had your hand up next, I saw. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, hi Jane. So I was in breakout room 10. I was an observer, and Linda, she was a moderator, where I found the categories that has been given. The content that was given, it would be an easier for an moderator when it would be given in a picture. So that would give a clear idea how that needs to be reorganized. Another observation that I had, while she was looking into the card, she was not pretty sure that how this item will be used. Particularly when looking into multiple items, she will be able to recognize that yes, these are salad item, but how this will be used in a salad, either it is as a raw, or either it will be used as a cooked. So those kind of knowledge that moderator needs to have while organizing the cards and organizing the categorization into that.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Suzanne, you have a question or comment?
I realized that I was assuming that we would, in practice, be recording the sessions.
I am.
So that
Yes.
when things like, what even is this, comes up, not only do you take notes, but you're like, okay, at this point in time, this keeps happening. People, you guys need to take a look at what's going on, or something, well, something like that. And I was like, okay, I suspect this is true. Maybe I should check in and mention it.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. This is a great discussion. We could probably talk about this for hours, because it's a lot, we found a lot of good things. I just want, like, we're gonna head off here and to a break in a minute, but does anybody have any, so let me ask you, was anybody confused? I'm guessing that most of the people here on the call are either in the United States or in Europe and may not be familiar with a Chimera. Would that be a safe call? Thumbs up or in the video or on the reactions? Yeah. And I could give you a little context around that. The first time I gave this workshop was for UX New Zealand. And in New Zealand, a Chimera is a sweet potato. So I wanted to kind of mix it up with a veggie that they knew, but I didn't know what that was. So that was why I kind of threw that in there for a bit of a wrench for our activity, knowing that there might be a lot of people who were not familiar, myself included, with what that veggie was. So I see that Nico, you have your hand up. Do you want to share your question or comment?
Sure, yeah, if that's cool. It's a quick one. So I was just wondering if your participant during a moderated card sort, if you see that they're labeling their groupings with more than just one name, like one word. Like for instance, I was noticing my categories were like leafy greens and then in parentheses base. And then I had another one that was like toppers / garnish. So like do you want to steer them or just ask them to just choose one word, especially if you're using a tool like Optimal Workshop, like to make it easier to see, like compare the results? Or do you want to let them have that flexibility of put whatever you think?
That's a good question. And my opinion is let them label it whatever they want. And a tool like Optimal Sort can help you resolve that a little bit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we go into the card sorts specifically. But if they want to call it, I had somebody who had a category that these are the vegetables my husband will eat. These are the vegetables my husband will not eat. And I'm like, okay, that's nice to know. Am I going to put that on website navigation? No, but that is the way that they categorized them. So again, it's aligning with their mental model, and not all those mental models will help your business structure and information architecture. And it is okay to discard some results for that very reason, right? So you have to take some of those interesting and maybe longer than you think labels. And information architecture labels don't have to be just one word. It's a guidance it's a way to guide you to get started, but they don't always have to be just one word. They can be, you don't want them too long, but they can be more than one word. So with that, I know we have a lot to cover today, so I just want to say this has been a great discussion, and maybe we can revisit some of this toward the end of the workshop, because I think we all have a lot of opinions that are great and experience that we could share with others. So I want to kind of save that to the end. And I know that we covered a lot, which is really awesome. So I want to give us a little bit of a break right now, if anyone is back and wants to put your video on and ask any questions before we move on through the talk, that would be excellent.
I'll ask one, Jen, and it's just
Yeah.
because I'm a talker and it's hard to moderate when you're a talker. When is it appropriate? I know we talked about bias and other things. When is it appropriate to share what you would have done had you been sorting, or is it ever appropriate to share? Because I think I did that, but I wasn't really sure if that was okay. Is it just collect the information, or is it also like discuss differences that you've noticed or were thinking through,
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I would say if you're ever having this participant work with you again, do not share what you would have done, and only really share what you would have done if they ask. But even then, it doesn't, I would say, I think what you have is pretty good, because you don't want them to feel like that they did something wrong. So I would
Right.
say, I mean, ultimately, no need for you to share at all. But if they really press you, I'd still try to just stay neutral and just play dumb. The best tactic to be a moderator is to play dumb. So
Yeah.
that's my advice. Lauren, do you have something to add?
I was just gonna say the same thing. Like, you're there to learn from them, not from them to learn from you. And as a moderator, your job is to create a safe space where there are no wrong answers. And when you start to share your own opinion, they might, exactly what Jen said, feel like they gave you the wrong answer, and then they might be hesitant to share openly with you in the future. So what they did is their truth, and that's the data, and the end.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
I know it's difficult, especially you want to share, right? But it really it doesn't really matter what you think. Unfortunately, I don't mean that to sound harsh, but really,
I'm so offended. That's so rude.
I
I'm
know.
signing off now. That's awful.
All right. Yeah, see, no, she's still here. Okay, anybody, before we move on to the next segment, anybody have another quick question before we go on?
Question. I don't know if it's gonna be covered, but I guess my main question is, how do you get to these cards? Like, how do you design them?
How do you determine what you want on the cards?
Yeah, like if you have any tricks, or how do you kind of like organize like you see the need, and then how do you come up with, this is what we're gonna land on, or these are the cards that we're gonna do?
Yeah, I do talk about that here, and I think it's in this next part. Yeah, so if I don't
Awesome.
answer that question, ask it again, and we'll make sure that we get that in the right way.
Awesome.
Yeah, one more question before we move on. I think Catherine, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question. If you're moderating someone whose English is not their native language, and they ask you just straight up, what is kale? I don't know what this is. How much can you tell them, or should you just not say anything? That's something I struggled with in the exercise.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it goes back to what I kind of mentioned earlier, is that you wouldn't be there to answer that question for them if they were navigating your site. So just kind of say, just get some, well, what do you think it is? And if they say, well, I think kale is like a type of brick, well, that's interesting because we're organizing vegetables. So a lot of people will create categories that say, I don't know. And I don't know if anybody did that here, but that is also very important context, because to what Randy mentioned earlier, a card sort in this instance doesn't have any visual clues, doesn't have any description, where a website would probably provide a little bit more of that context. But testing at this level of just basic words is really valuable too, just to get that level set of understanding. Do they even know what we're talking about? Does that answer your question? So unfortunately, it feels awkward. I know, where they're asking for help and you want to help them. And you also don't want them to go on Google to complete this sort, but you do want to learn that they don't know something, or they're confused by something. And to what Lauren mentioned earlier, it's kind of that technical jargon in a sense, right? Granted, in this case, it was kale or bok choy or kumara, but that's important to note. Like, they just didn't know what this was, full stop. So we need to provide them some help so that there's some context. Yeah, Linda, you're muted. You're still muted.
Okay, it said press the space bar and that didn't work. Okay, to tie on to that question about not knowing what the item is, as far as, what about asking the question, okay, you don't know what this means, what would you do next? Would that be valid?
Yeah, I think that's fair. What would you, yeah, because then, how would you categorize this? What would you think it, that's kind of what you're there to have them do, right? Yeah.
Well, I'm
that's
just
great.
wondering if they would say something like, you know, they would Google it,
Yeah.
or they would just give up.
Very
That'd
good.
be an
Yeah.
interesting value to get out of that, of like, what is this something that you, yeah, like you said, give up, or is it something where you just make assumptions, or is it something where you Google search?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree, Linda. That's a very
Okay.
good follow-up question. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on.
I just want to
Oh.
make a comment regarding language, that if part of your audience, it's likely to be speakers of a different language, make sure that you have a moderator that speak the original, you know, whatever the language is, that, you know, if you might need to have a bilingual moderator if that's part of, you know, your audience, your target market, who can come, and you might need to set up 2 languages on your website or your app, so you are sensitive to that's, you know, part of your market. We do a lot of Spanish and English type of studies because some clients just really, you know, cater that market. So
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks, Michaela. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the tools that you can use to conduct a card sort. So back in the pre-COVID days, I would do card sorts kind of like what we did a little bit, like what we did with in-person and moderated. And when I did in-person and moderated, I loved using very low fidelity cardstock, paper, and markers. Now I'm kind of mostly conducting card sorts virtually. So my favorite tools happen to be Optimal Sort, which I mentioned is one of the sponsors of World IA Day. But I love that tool because I really find it helpful with analysis. And I'm not sure, anybody here familiar with Optimal Workshop or Optimal Sort? Anybody use those tools? Yeah, a little bit, a couple people. It's okay if you have not. But there are other tools that you could use, like User Zoom, that are also similar online tools. And there's like what we did today, which is a virtual whiteboard, like Miro. You could even do things, you could create a card sort in Figma if you wanted to. You would create the cards and have somebody move it around in Figma, which is a user experience design tool that a lot of people may or may not be familiar with. But the beauty of Figma is it's in a browser and you can be in there and watch them as they conduct the sort. So let's do another quick poll. So Lana's going to tee up another poll for us. And the question is, let's see if anyone has any experience conducting a card sort. So we're going to bring up the poll and ask, in what ways have you ever conducted a card sort? And click all that apply. So have you used paper with markers and pens? Have you used a digital whiteboard? Have you used an online tool like Optimal Sort, or even a design tool like Figma or Sketch? Or have you ever, maybe you've never conducted a card sort? So let's go ahead and take a few moments to fill in this poll and see where we are. Okay, looks like we're done. So Lana's going to share the results. So it looks like the majority have either done it with paper cards and markers, the old school kind of low fidelity way, or they've done it with an online tool like Optimal Sort. But some people haven't ever done one, which is great because that's what we're here to learn how to do today. So cool. Looks like we have a range of experiences and a range of experiences with tools. So that's great. All right, so let's talk about some best practices when it comes to conducting a card sort. So again, if I'm doing a card sort in person, I like to use index cards and have the item printed on the card. So you can either directly print on the card, or you can use self-adhesive labels, or you can even handwrite them on the card. But I want you to consider what your handwriting might look like if you do that, because my handwriting's pretty bad. So we don't want Jen writing hand cards, writing them on the card. So just take that into consideration, but it is an option. So let's pretend when we're walking through this that we're doing it in person. And I try to limit, it's kind of to your question, Brenda, I try to limit it to topics that are 50 or 60 maximum. I think we had 20 cards in the card sort with the veggies, but any more than 50 or 60 can be really overwhelming. So I'd say you really want to do this limit, no more than 60. And you place the cards on a surface and in a stack and just let them organize it in whatever way that makes sense to them. So give them enough space to do it, give them a large table, and reshuffle the cards. Don't always give them the cards in the same order, because reshuffling the cards can give it, if you have it in the same order, that could lead to some bias because they're all in the same order. So shuffle the cards in between participants if you can, and give some clear instructions. So you ask them to organize these topics into groups that make sense to them. Let them understand there are no wrong answers. We talked about that. And this gives them confidence in the way that they organize things. And randomize the cards in between participants again. And this helps prevent bias and the anchoring effect. Now, I don't intend for this to sound mean, and we talked about this a bit. If they ask you, is this right? Or should I put these together? Or would you do it this way? Don't answer that. Instead, tell them that what they think is really the valuable answer, and gently remind them we're here to understand how they group items and that their answers are awesome. So it's not what we think, it's what they think that's really matters. So let's talk about actually how to do this card sort thing. First, we're going to assume that it's a moderated card sort. So you're going to be observing them create the categories and then talk to them about why they created the groupings, just like you did in that last activity. So first you need to determine and create your list of topics. And some of the ways that you can determine this list are, what are the most important things that you want to test? What are some of the most popular things on your site that you want to test? And what are some of the most confusing things that you want to test? And these, you might run more than one sort, especially if you have a lot of cards, but these are some things to consider. What are the most important on your site? What are the most popular or the most frequently visited? And then what could potentially cause the most confusion for your visitors? And you put one topic on each card. You give the cards to participate to the participant, and then you have them create the labels if it's an open card sort. Or you provide the categories that they need to organize the items in if it's a closed card sort. And we're going to go into that a little bit more in a little bit. But make sure you have plenty of space, big open table, or so that they can spread out the cards, and then let them go through the activity on their own. To Michaela's point, ask them to think out loud, but if they don't feel comfortable doing that, let them go through it in silence, and you can follow up at the end of the card sort and get that context. And record their answers. Take a screenshot if it's a virtual board, record, to what Lauren said earlier, record what they said they do, and then based on a conversation, how they might modify it, make sure you have a note of that. And then talk to them and have them explain why they did the groupings that they did. So when I gave this workshop a couple months ago at UX New Zealand, we were lucky because they have COVID under control over there and they can meet in person, even though I gave the workshop remotely. So we talked about how to do it in person a lot, but I'm assuming a lot of us on the call, at least this day and age, are good. If we are going to do a card sort, it's going to be virtually, or it's going to be asynchronously unmoderated using a tool like Optimal. So here's a picture of an in-person moderated card sort that I did. And as you can see, I just used cards and printed the topics on the card. I also included some blank cards because I wanted them to be able to, if they had additional topics that they thought were important that they needed to put in here, to capture that as well. And it was a closed card sort because you can see the categories, things I need now, but this particular participant created their own category, which is, I don't need this at all. So giving them some of that flexibility will help you understand their mental model a little bit and get you to a better IA, because you may not have considered some of these things. So if you can, do a moderated card sort, give some flexibility to let them add additional cards or topics or categories. So like I mentioned, there's kind of two approaches to a virtual card sort. There's small batches of people. When I say batches, small groups of people, and large, more quantitative studies where you're asking hundreds, perhaps thousands to create categories for you. And if you want to do a quick card sort that's, say, with under 10 people, I'd say a tool like a digital whiteboard is perfectly fine for that. Mural, Miro, something like that. But if you need a large number of participants, that's when I would recommend another digital online tool like Optimal Sort. And when you're doing a card sort online, you do the same as a physical card sort. Determine if it's going to be open, closed, or hybrid. And I'm going to talk a little bit more of that later. You upload the topics into the tool, like we've done here, and you just let them drag the cards over and create the categories that make sense to them. So remember, the whole point of a card sort is to have people organize topics into groups that make sense to them. So we're going to take a deeper dive into the three major kind of card sorts. So buckle up, folks. This is a lot of information. This is fire hose time. So this is the really good stuff here. So first thing we're going to talk about is an open card sort. And an open card sort is when you provide the topics, but no predefined categories. And this is what you just did in your activity that you just did. So the participant makes the groups, then they name each group in a way that describes or labels that content. You just did that in that previous example. So you use an open card sort to learn how users group content and the terms or the labels that they would give each category. You would not use an open card sort when the labels are clear or they don't need to be defined. In that case, you would not use an open card sort. So there are some benefits to an open card sort, and that is the users give you some labels. So when you build your navigation of a site or an app, you can potentially use these labels to match what the users expect. They might come up with some labels that you would have never thought of, which is really cool. This is a test of just words. So when you're testing just the words versus having those visual clues, you'll have confidence that the words alone make sense. But on the flip side, there are some downsides to an open card sort. People might create some funky buckets. So there can be a lot of analysis with these categories. So one of the last card sorts I worked on, people created over 1,000 categories. Now that's a lot of data to analyze. And though many of the categories had similar names and groupings, so that helped, but still that seems overwhelming at first. And there is a bit of a burden on the user to come up with the labels on their own. So it could take a little bit longer for them to complete an open card sort. And by using just words, kind of to Randy's point, it doesn't simulate navigating a real website or product. So there's no visual clues, there's no hierarchy on the page, no images like a normal website might have. So it might be a bit strange for some people to organize things. So how does an open card sort help define your site's IA? Well, you see the groupings people create and how they organize the content. Not only do you see these groupings, but you also see the labels that they give them. These labels could potentially become titles and labels for pages in the sections of what you're building. Okay, so you did an open card sort. Now what do you do with the data? Well, you want to review the major categories formed. You combine similar categories. When you do this, the similar categories should have similar items grouped together and similar labels. So for example, a fruit one that I did recently, it was like berry, berries, fruit berries, like those are all very similar labels. And then within those groups, they had the same fruit. Well, you can combine those, and that's kind of going to become one category at that point. And a tool like Optimal can help you, they call it standardize, and can help you do that. And that will cut down the amount of categories that you get and help in your analysis. So you want to determine which cards are together the most frequently. Determine how often the cards appear together in specific categories. Determine what label those cards had the most. Also, what kind of second place or alternative did those cards come in? Should they be combined into a larger or smaller group? Should they be placed in more than one category? And it won't be black and white. So you're going to have to really examine the data a bit to surface those insights. It helps to validate by doing a follow-up, like a closed card sort or a hybrid card sort. And once you determine which topics roughly fall into each category, you share your insights with your team, you propose where the information architecture stands from that point, and maybe suggest some further testing. So now let's move on to the next type of card sort, which is a closed card sort. In a closed card sort, participants are asked to sort topics from content into predefined categories. And a closed card sort works best when you're comfortable with the labels or the categories and what they should be called. But you want to learn how users would organize things within those determined categories. So again, you use it when you're confident with your labels and you just want to see how they organize things. And you would not use a closed card sort when you're not super confident that the labels are right. So the good things about a closed card sort, it's a bit easier to organize the cards into categories that you give people. Great, just throw them into the buckets that you say. So this means a little less burden on the participants to come up with their own category labels. And there's also less categories that are going to be created, so the analysis is a bit easier. And you're getting closer to confidence that the words and the labels make sense to users. But there are some cons to a closed card sort. People might call the category something different. And if you provided the name for the groupings for them, you won't learn this because you've already given that a label. And it still takes a bit of time to organize all the cards. So, be patient with the participant. And like with an open card sort, this activity does not simulate navigating a real website. So there aren't any visual clues again. So how does this card sort help define your IA? Well, it gets you closer in confidence that you're organizing things in ways that make sense to a user. What you can do is you can conduct an open card sort first, and then you can do a closed card sort to validate that your IA is moving in the right direction. So how to analyze the data in a closed card sort? Well, review the topics that people put into the categories and determine which cards were together the most often. Determine how often those cards appeared together and see what kind of alternative or second place those cards went in. Again, it won't be black and white. And the next step could be to validate with a tree jack test. And we're going to go into that a little bit further. So once you've determined what topics roughly fall into what category, you share this insight with your team and perhaps suggest further testing options. Or it might be at the point where you feel comfortable with your proposed information architecture. So in other words, for a closed card sort, if you have a pretty good idea of what the labels will be called, then what you really want to know is how they're going to be grouped. You use a closed card sort to help them sort the topics. You already know the category names. You just need to know how people will organize them. And then finally, let's talk about the last card sort method, which is the hybrid card sort. And that's when some of the categories are provided for the participant to put into buckets, but they also have the ability to create their own categories that make sense, in addition to the ones that the researcher provides. So when do you use a hybrid card sort? Well, you use it when some of the categories are so simple and determined that you know these buckets should exist. But you want to identify more categories in addition to the simple ones. So for example, it's a common practice that a lot of websites have a contact us section. So you could provide that for your participant, provide that category and what items would they put into the contact us bucket, but you provide additional categories for them to organize the other things. Since contact us is a pretty common paradigm, there's not really any need to test that or change up the label or anything. And so when you would not use a hybrid, well, when you're not confident in the categories and when you're not confident in the category labels, that's when you use an open card sort. Or when you're completely confident in the categories, that's when you use a closed card sort. So there are definitely some benefits to using a hybrid card sort. So providing some of the categories moves the card sorting activity along faster because some of the categories are already established. And it confirms easily understood categories. That is, if the participant puts the cards into those easily understood categories. And you'll learn this through your card sort. And it allows some flexibility to see how how participants might name some of the categories on your site. But on the flip side, if established categories are not correct, in other words, they don't meet the user's mental model, then they could inaccurately categorize things. And to Mike's comment earlier, some people don't follow directions and just put all the categories into the ones you provided and don't create new ones. I have seen this where I had a hybrid, they just put everything into the ones you gave them and they didn't create new ones. So be aware that this could happen and you might have to kind of wash those results. So in some ways, the hybrid card sort combines the best of an open and a closed card sort. You provide some of the categories that you feel comfortable in, but provide some flexibility by allowing users to create some of the categories that make sense to them. And if you have a pretty good idea what the user will call most of the groups, then maybe some of the groups you're not sure about, they can go about labeling those. So use a hybrid card sort method to help them sort topics into categories that are clearly defined or that they want to create some of their own. So for analysis, like any other card sort method, you want to combine similar groups to see which cards fell into the same categories most frequently. And you also want to determine that second place or those alternative places where they put those cards and see if that's a good fit as well. You share these findings with your team. And if you have a tool like Optimal Workshop, you might consider a tree jack test. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later.
Wow. Thanks, Jen. That was a lot of really great information. So let's just see if you all were paying attention. I have a pop quiz for you, and I'm going to give you a scenario, and you tell me which card sorting method would be the best to use to test for information architecture. So here comes the pop. All right. You have a category called tropical fruit, and you want to see which items people put in that category. Which type of card sort would you use to find this out? Closed, open, hybrid, none of the above, all of the above, and I don't know. Pause here and let everybody give their answers. All right, looks like we got about everybody. And, ooh, it looks like closed card sort is the answer. We chose the most, and that is the correct answer. You do a closed card sort when you're confident with the labels on the categories, but you want to see how users organize items into those categories. But hybrid is also a correct answer, so good job. Remember that you can conduct a hybrid card sort when some categories are so simple or understood that you know these buckets should exist. But you want your participants to identify more categories in addition to the simple ones. Great job on the pop quiz, everyone. Back to you, Jen.
All right. Thanks, Lana. Good job, everybody. Let me shut this. Okay, so remember that fruit I showed you a little bit earlier today? Well, I conducted a little card sort test of my own to see how people would organize the fruit. And I learned some very interesting things. First, I used the optimal sort, and I had the test open for about a week. I combined and standardized using that optimal tool with things that had the same labels. So things that had berry, berries, fruit berries, berry fruit, and the same cards in there. I combined some of those categories, and that cut my results in about half by using that tool. So that helps a lot. But when you combine things, you need to be careful not to just throw everything together because they have the same label. I start with the simplest, smallest group, like raspberries and strawberries together were often labeled berries in some way. So combine the ones that have very high alignment in a small number of cards first, and then build out from there. So when you think about then you have to think about categories that make sense to your company or your website. And we talked a little bit about this. Categories like fruit my husband will eat, or things I like, or basic will significantly vary per person. So those types of labels really won't make sense when it comes to navigation for your site. So let's look at an example, basic. So participants created groups and some of them gave the label basic. And this goes back to why you can't just lump all the cards together that have the same title. Check this out. If there are we're looking at 3 examples of groupings that people call basic. Well, the top one has 3 cards, and the middle one has 8 cards, and the bottom one has 6 cards. Well, what do you consider a basic fruit? Do these groups align with what you consider basic? And if you look across these groups, the banana does fall into these groups, but so do a bunch of other cards. So this is why you have to look not only at the labels that people give it, but the cards within that grouping. So you can't just lump together things by the title. So an open card sort can certainly give you some interesting and some challenging results, but it's a great start for you to determine not only the way people group items, but how they might label them. And I want to point out that yes, not all the labels are going to be very helpful for you. So that's something that you have to consider. But it is, as with any kind of quantitative test, some of the results you might just have to trash because they're not super helpful for you in your final information architecture recommendation. But it's a good start. And if you have a good amount of results and good context around why, this is a great way to start to understand what labels might work so that your users understand them. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions about the different kinds of card sorts we just walked through? If you do, let's take a minute, come off of mute, ask a question of us. Take a minute, no questions? Okay.
I put it in the chat, but do you merge the group if the spelling or capitalization is different? So like you have basic fruit and then basic fruits.
Yes, I would. I would merge them. When you work with optimal, even if the words are spelled exactly the same in lowercase, they still they still mark them as separate groups. So berries with a capital B and berries with a small b and berries plural and berries singular, if they're all the same, I would group them and just kind of make a note of like the differences. Is it plural? Is it not? And knowing that overall structure of how that might work when you're IA. If you pluralize berries, then you should also pluralize apples, right? Not have singular. So think about that consistency. But yeah, I would if they're very similar, I would combine them for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Actually, I do have one. So I was just asking a question earlier in the chat about subcategories, but what if the user starts getting like really deep into like breaking down further and further to the point where they really don't know how to handle like all the subcategories, like, and then they step back and they're like, no, I got to redo all of this because this doesn't make sense anymore. Like, at what point do you kind of like, do you stop them? Or do you direct them some other way? Like, how do you kind of manage that when they start going down that rabbit hole?
So a tool like Optimal only gives the top level buckets. So they can't bucket within and within. So it's only those top level buckets. So if you do need to find that deeper structure, you probably will need to do a different kind of card sort. Say, for example, if you know you have a category of apples, but you need them to go the level deeper of what kind of apples, then that's when you do your card sort at that level. But for a tool like Optimal, there's only one level deep. You can't go 2-3 levels deep. Does that make sense?
Right, because like I've had the situation where they're, because it's an open card sort, they started grouping them that way. So they gave it a high category like level and it slash the subcategory. But then they started looking deeper and they were like, no, I got to go back and change it to like deeper and deeper and deeper. But then they also realized that they can't really put them back into, like, they can't organize it the way they want. So they get confused at that point.
Sure.
So like, what are some of the ways that you can kind of bring them back and go, hey, well, let's go back to that higher level and kind of manage that situation?
Yeah, no, okay, that's a fair question. And maybe you give the instructions around that activity. We're only going to go 1 or 2 levels deep maximum. Let's not go any deeper than that. So like if you start to see like, oh, I want to do this category, that like you can go, well, let me get a good understanding of a high level, and then next time we'll go deeper. Or you could, does that make sense? Like maybe you just kind of stop the train a little bit. Like, great, this is great. I know that you would break it down deeper, but for this test, we're going to just go here and get this level of context.
Great.
Okay. All right. Well, if we're ready, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about card sort analysis. So like I said before, the data from a card sort and the research, the recommendations that you're going to come up with is not straightforward, especially for an open card sort. And why is that? Well, because there's a lot of data to analyze. So for the card sort activity we're going to walk through, we're going to do one today. We presented 20 cards that we had people group together. And in the end, we had almost 250 people group these 20 cards, and they created over 1,000 unique categories. That's a lot. So obviously, we're not going to have 1,000 categories on a website. So you can see how an open card sort can be a bit more work. So you might be asking, well, is it worth it? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I will say, as I mentioned before, that Optimal does offer some tools to help you analyze the data and to get you on the right path for determining your product's information architecture. But it's not as simple as just pushing a button and a report comes out with all the answers you ever hoped for. Nope. You still need to wrestle that data and interpret that data a bit to figure out what the heck is going on. So walk with me through the analysis a little bit. And it helps if you have some idea of what groupings might be formed. And it's not necessary to have a strong hypothesis. And Tracy, this talks a little bit about, the biases you might be starting to come up with as you see categories formed. You have some idea, but you don't want to bias that, right? So a card sort research method is not super scientific. There's just too many loosey-goosey categories that can be formed and a lot of data to consider to strictly form that hypothesis of, we know these categories are going to be formed. Plus, you don't want to suffer from confirmation bias as you do analysis. So it's okay to have a strong theory going in, but you might want to view the data. You don't want to view the data to confirm what you think is right. We just don't want to do that. So it does help to have some idea of the groups that people might form, but you also want to be open to where the data actually takes you. So we're going to dive into a little bit of an activity here. Lana's going to bring you to a spot in Mural, and we're going to look at how to analyze data in for an open card sort. And so, like I mentioned, Optimal has a number of tools to help you see things coming together. And we're going to look at some things that some of the tools that Optimal has to help you see this. So you can either look on your screen at Lana's at the Zoom screen, or look in Mural, whichever you feel more comfortable looking. So first, we're going to look at a similarity matrix. And what this handy little tool does is it shows you the way people paired items. So the items with the darker blue shading appear together the most often. The darker the blue, the more frequent these two items were grouped together. So let's have a little bit of a closer look. As you can see where we drew some of these colored squares, you're starting to see little clusters coming together. These are showing you items that were paired together a lot. So could this be like maybe little categories starting to form? It just might be. So let's look at this next item. Lana, can you take us down a little bit to the next item on the screen here? This is called a dendrogram. Has anyone heard, this is kind of a fancy word. Has anyone heard of a dendrogram? Give me a thumbs up in your video or in your reactions if you've ever heard this term before. I know it's kind of fancy. So what a dendrogram shows is the items that have been grouped together the most frequently. The more you go to the right on the dendrogram, the lines look fatter. And those fatter lines mean there's less agreement between those items. So in other words, these cards that were put together here, there's not a special alignment the fatter the line. But when you, I know it seems a little counterintuitive, but this is how a dendrogram works. But as you move to the left, these items were grouped together the most often. So let's take a look at this for a second and take a look at this dendrogram and come off of mute and somebody kind of summarize, like, what do you see here? What's this dendrogram showing? Anybody have any thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes.
So like I see that carrot is labeled in green along with radish and beet and the other 5 vegetables, but I don't see how carrot is linked to beets or radishes. Is that like, if I just follow the line toward the right side of the chart, is it still connected with radishes and beets because it's like, you know, it's like as long as the lines are connected somehow, then they're grouped together. Yes. I'm just trying to understand, I guess, like how you got the 4 different colors based on this dendrogram.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair question. And this was something that Optimal produces on its own. So what it is this green group at the top is the things that most people put together the most often. And then the branches off, like where it says radishes and beet, that has a really specific alignment to where a lot more people group those two together. And at the bottom where it says parsnip, potatoes, and taro, even more people group those. So the more they fork off, even though the lines get smaller, it's actually a stronger agreement between those pairs or those 2 or 3. Because this isn't a fixed group necessarily, even though it's green, even though it seems like, oh, well, this is one group. Well, if you really start looking at the cards, not everybody grouped taro with radishes and certain groups, but a lot did. So the smaller the line, the more you get to the left, the more that those were grouped together, especially into pairs.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
So are you asking us to tell you what our categories would be if we were to group these? Or
I'm just kind of looking, good question. I'm just kind of like, what overall, what are you kind of seeing? Just if you were to summarize in this dendro, what's the high level, like, what are you seeing here?
Root vegetables, green leafy vegetables, garnishes and vegetables that I don't like. Sorry. And then the asparagus, zucchini, and eggplant. I don't like. Would you? They seem very similar, but the word is escaping me right now in terms of like not like nightshade vegetables or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah. So the labels that these people gave are not on this dendrogram. It's just showing alignment, right? And we're going to go down to talk about a little bit about the labels. But what this dendrogram is just showing you at a real high level is what people group together the most. How similar, just a real high level, like asparagus, zucchini, and eggplant were grouped together more often than an eggplant and a fennel. Those aren't in the same group. So it's just kind of giving you a quick glance of what they are. And it's interesting you said nightshades, because thinking back to the analysis, people did use that label quite a bit. And I was like, nightshade, what's that? So it's funny that you said that. I do recall seeing that quite a bit.
I am curious, as far as I can tell on here, it looks like it's never more than two things are connected. Is that just a part of the way the dendrogram works, or is that on purpose? So like the radishes and beets are connected to one, so they have been grouped together, but then it's not like immediately paired with carrot or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's just the way that the tool kind of surfaces the data. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Jen, I have
but
a question.
If you look, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
okay. So my question was, I remember the first slide that you show of the workshop you did in Australia, I guess. It had like the financial terms like more complex, and beneath you could see kind of like a more like a clear explanation of what that term meant. Do you know if in Optimal or in User Zoom you can create those like the header and then just some sort of little, you can do that as well?
Yeah, you can do. I'm not sure about User Zoom, but I know you can in Optimal. You can provide a description. You can also do images in Optimal Zoom. You could have an image and have people use an image for your card sort. It doesn't have to be words. I'm pretty sure you can use an image too. And then with that image, you could give it a description as well.
Got it.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, so let's look at the next item. Lana, can you go down the page down to one? So we're going to first focus on this top level of veggies, the ones in the green. And so we're going to look at this dendrogram. And I want to give full disclosure, this word cloud was created manually. It was not created by Optimal Sort. I really wish it was. That would be very, very cool. And I need to rattle their chain and maybe have them make this a feature, because that was really a handy idea. So first of all, the veggies in this group are beet, radish, carrot, parsnip, potato, taro, kumara, and swede. And so the words here in the word cloud are weighted by the frequency of what people called these group of veggies. So the larger the word, the more this label was applied to the group. So in a sense, this is a strong step toward applying a label to a group of items. So yay, we're getting closer to some IA here, finally. So let's talk about these words. Based on what you see here, what might we group this this group of veggies? What, somebody come out and looking at the word cloud. What might you call this? Anybody have any ideas?
Root vegetables.
Okay, root vegetables, you said? Someone said roots? Mike?
Anytime that I do an exercise like this, I try to find the shortest number of characters. And here, roots would be the one that I would use, or maybe even root, because it's the biggest text and everything else is pretty long. So especially if you're going to do it in multi-languages, a word like root in English might be 4 letters, but in German it might be 8. And oftentimes I work on things that have to do with multiple languages, so I have to keep that in mind as well.
Very good point.
I would also say that it depends on the context, because sometimes words might have, particularly if you're working in different countries, they can have different connotations. So you might want to be more descriptive, and that it's always a trade-off. If it's clear that it's root vegetables or is it roots, for someone who comes in to the place and with no other reference, they may or may not be as clear that's what's on the roots. But if you say root vegetables, is what we're talking about. So
Yeah,
you can go both ways.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Both of them are really good. So that is something you'd want to have some further context and some testing around, right? To get some understanding about, do the labels make sense? So excellent. So it looks like maybe we have an option for a first draft of an information architecture for roots. Let's just say, stick with that one. Okay, so nice. So let's look at another level of veggies. Lana, if you want to move us down to the next level, the ones that are in blue, and bring us to there on the mural, if we're following along on the mural. These veggies are cabbage, spinach, kale, bok choy, and watercress. So let's talk about what we think the labels for this group might be. Anybody have any ideas?
Leafy greens.
Leafy greens? Okay. Yeah.
Or just
that sounds
leafy.
like a good start.
Or just shorten it to leaf greens.
Maybe. Yeah. There's certainly some options, right? Like to consider what that might be. Just looking at what people used, they have leafy greens, they have leafy vegetables. There is the shorter term leaf here. So there seem to be a bit more that use leafy, but it might be something to consider, that the pros and cons of having leaf versus leafy, right? It's hard to, we want to kind of get a little bit better understanding about that. So based on what we talked about today, what could our next step be? We have some ideas of some navigational labels. What would we do now, do you think?
Maybe decide which order if
Do a closed or maybe a hybrid with the terms we've thought about.
Yeah, we could have a closed card sort if we felt pretty confident that the labels are strong. Or we could have a hybrid card sort if we felt like some of the labels are pretty strong, but wanted to let people still label some of the groups. Or if time's tight and we can't do another card sort, maybe we do a tree jack test. And so it sounds like we have a few options, right? So that makes sense. But wait a second. We have a challenge. A stakeholder is going to come in and wreck things for you a bit. That never happens, right? Despite what the data shows, the stakeholder insists that bok choy is not a leafy green. She thinks it's a green vegetable. Now, she's not completely wrong. There was a lot of suggestion for the label green and for the label vegetable, right? So she wants you to create a new category and call it green vegetables. Well, sometimes we want to play nice and make the stakeholder happy, but we're going to do one better. We're going to test this label and we're going to see where people look for bok choy. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further when we talk about our next method, which is a tree jack test. But before we talk about tree jacks, I have a few considerations for the card sort. So we're going to switch back to the talk here. And after any card sort, or really any testing that you might do, it's a great time to reflect on the test that you did and see how you might have done things differently. And think about how your research approach might be improved for next time. They're always learning and iterating, right? So In what ways might the data be skewed, even if it's unintentional? Well, here are some things we thought about after our test. First, what kind of site is this? That could affect the labels and the labels they use and how people might navigate the site. So for example, if it's a healthy food conscious kind of site, they might group things in a different way than a general grocery store would. If it's a recipe site, they may look for ways to cook the veggies or what type of cuisine they might be in. If it's a site where you're purchasing gifts, maybe a gift hamper or gift basket situation, veggies could be bundled together in yet another way, like foods that could be stored longer versus foods that you need to cook right away. And I definitely saw some of that food storage reference in the card sort. So this lack of context as to what type of site it is could change the user's mental model of what they want to look for here. So think about how that might affect things. So next, what might cause confusion? We talked a little bit about this. There's certainly different names for things, like kumara is a sweet potato. Zucchini is also known as a squash. Eggplant is also known as an aubergine. So there are some things people don't know at all, like kumara or watercress or bok choy. They might not know what those are at all. Also, since the card sort only supplied names, there's a lack of context to a real website or an app. There are no photos of the items. As we talked about, there's no descriptions or opportunity to hover over things to get some more information. And there's no context as to where it is on a page and what things might be around it. So those can also supply some information. So to that point, when there's only words and there's no web page, a card sort isn't an experience that users would do on a website. They're not doing a card sort generally. They're coming here to find things and to do things, right? So that they're not organizing things. And so these are some of the things you might want to consider that might change or skew or affect your results, is that lack of context in some circumstances. So the question then becomes, is this even worth it? Why should we even do this? Well, I'll give you the short answer. Could be the classic UX answer of it depends. I see Tracy mouthed it with me, which is awesome. It depends. Sure, an open card sort is time consuming and the analysis is not straightforward and black and white. It takes effort to clean up and wrestle that data. And it's slippery and things don't bubble up to the surface easily. And it does take time to analyze and make those recommendations. But it really is one of the best methods for understanding with confidence your user's mental models. Seeing the labels the user would look under, discovering the groupings and the clusters where users expect similar things to live. And finally, it identifies the way users organize things, not the way the company thinks things should be organized. Have you ever heard of a product team making assumptions about things and then they're wrong? Yeah, every day we make assumptions and sometimes we're wrong. So if the users help in the organization of things, the things will be easier to find. Sales are going to go up. Support calls are going to go down. And things make sense for the end user. So this is a win-win for the user and the business. Ooh, okay. I know we unpacked a lot of information there, and hopefully you feel a little bit more comfortable about how to analyze a card sort, but I think we need a little bit of breather. So how does everybody feel about maybe a 5-minute break this time, just to get a snack, drink, 5 minutes, come back at 6 minutes, we'll make it 6 minutes, 30 after. Okay, let's do that. If anybody wants to stay on and ask me any questions, I'm here, but please don't feel you have to go take a break.
Hey, Jen, can you hear me? Oh yeah, you were drinking, sorry.
Yeah, I'm like, Yeah.
Really, really great, great session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do have a question for you and also for the people attending here. So I'm working right now on a digital health platform. I don't know how many of you know that the #1 killer of women, more than all cancers combined, is heart disease. And 50% of the women following a heart attack get misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression or heartburn. And there you go, you have women who die in 5 minutes of something that is 80% preventable if they were referred to a specialist and diagnosed correctly. And this happened in my family, and this is the reason why I'm working on this solution. Now, I've talked with many women survivors from heart attacks, actually, who were for 10 years diagnosed with anxiety and put on antidepressants. And then one day their heart exploded and they ended up in emergency and then woke up with 3 bypasses out of nowhere, when all these years, apparently they were depressed, but no heart problems. So the mission that I have with my platform, which is called Cor di Fio, in Italian, cor is heart, D of, and Fio was the name of my mom. It's to raise awareness and also early detect heart disease in women before it happens. So let's say the target group here is women between 25 to 55, taking this kind of a decades, because they all manifest, heart disease manifests in these groups of women differently, like premenopausal 45 to 55, that's the hormonal change. And that's when the heart disease has more frequency, but also 35 to 45 when babies arrive. Apparently there's also heart disease in pregnant women that they don't even know about that, and then younger women that, you know, and for all of them, they just, you drop dead and you're gone in 5 minutes, although you're healthy. So my target groups here is like women without heart disease yet, but it's about raising awareness and early detecting issues, because doctors are very much biased. There's only 10 or 15 minutes that you can spend with a doctor, and then probably get referred to a psychologist or something else. But the point is, like, how do you empower women with their own health and take a more active role in understanding their problems, and not even going to the doctors when there's a problem and say terrible headache or this and that, but actually have this kind of constant checkups. So this is the context, a little bit long, but how would you, from your expertise and what you've seen happening in the field, how would you go with testing the user's appetite for such a thing?
An appetite for the site itself?
For this kind of a solution, and also knowing about this problem. It seems that women don't know about this, majority of them, but also men don't know about it. So there you go, you have, in the current, I mean, everybody talks about breast cancer and that, but, and which is great, in other cancers, the thing is with heart disease, when it hits, you're gone in 5 minutes. Whereas with other, you know, diseases, you have maybe time to say goodbye or this or that.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about this kind of things, but actually heart disease is killing 50 or 60% more women, whereas breast cancer, less than 3%.
Yeah, I think this is like such an important topic in general, just in healthcare. I think it's probably not super related to card sorts, but definitely in terms of user research and desirability. I think you're talking a lot about like, how do we raise awareness of this thing? How do we test whether people are interested in that kind of thing, which is probably a bit outside the realm of this topic, but probably you could do a lot of different research activities to understand current level of awareness and interest, by doing, you know, empathy research with your target audience, or other types of methods, which, you know, are super important.
You find that type of research mostly in the market research insights field. About brand awareness and usage, market feasibility, which has to do with segmentation, where you talk about with users, current users, if you have any, or potential, you go and see with concept testing, what is that, what is the appeal of this? What is that what type of need it needs this product and platform meets, and you start, usually you might go rounds with qualitative research, which I know in the UX world is more, we talk about user interviews, we call in-depth interviews, and then you go more quantitative with quantitative methods, just to try to get a sense of the feasibility, the appeal of this to a larger market. But it really, I agree with what Lauren is not necessarily connected to card sorting.
I know.
But it's more about concept testing, sounds like it, that you're trying to ask, and market feasibility, viability.
And also it comes down to, usually if you think that you're healthy, why would you go and use such a thing? But then out of the blue, something happens, and then you get misdiagnosed, and then you die. Because that's what happens.
Yeah, well, and that's about exploring different segments in terms of health consciousness and interest in that topic and past history. So you probably are looking at more of a market segmentation and attitudes towards health and self-care, and see how they use different tools and products to practice prevention if they think that's so if you look at the market, you will find a segment that is really very much into it, and you're going to have another ones they are in denial. They don't want to hear about it. They think that if they don't know, nothing's going to happen. And so you kind of have to figure out what's the size of those segments and target the one that is really going to be more amenable, at least to start. Converting someone who really is in denial is going to be really hard. So you have to find other ways of communicating with that. But I think the first step is just probably do a market segmentation, trying to see which segments are really interested in this type of product.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All your insights, Michaela, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jen, I have one more question. For
Yes.
all the users that we are doing, what should be the ideal sample size that we usually look for? So let's say for this case that we are discussing right now, so the audience is very large. So how much sample do we need to collect, or maybe the another part which I just wanted to focus into, like we discussed into the card sorting. Do we have any strategy where we can identify the focus group? Because once if we are doing that kind of activity in a closed room, or maybe identified, let's say that product has a very wide reach, and we have selected some focus group who are maybe not the right user for that kind of thing. So how do we get handle those kind of problem, which I feel I think maybe you can throw some light into it.
Yeah, that's a good question. First, you always want to be testing to get legitimate data. You want to be testing from your true user group. So that's something that you want to make sure that, you don't want the garbage in, garbage out kind of thing that they say. You want good approach to your studies by doing the best that you can to talk to the actual users of your site. So whatever the site might be, you might want to do some, you can hire companies to recruit specific user groups. They can screen to get you those kinds of users. It costs money, but it's potentially worth the effort to make that kind of investment to get data of people who's going to be actually using your group. But we're kind of behind schedule, so I want to save these kind of questions for the end of the workshop so that we can keep moving. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward, and we're going to move on to a tree jack. And so this is a method that, has anybody here heard of a tree jack? Maybe conducted one or heard one? Give me a thumbs up in your video or in the reactions if you've ever heard. Some of you have heard it. Okay, great. So this method helps you evaluate the findability of topics on your product or site. So it tells you where users might get lost by showing you the wrong path that they could take. So a tree test is a validation method. So you need to have some architecture or structure to do this. So a tree jack can help you find out if the labels make sense. Are the topics grouped logically? Can the information be found where we placed it? And if not, where else do they expect to find it? So when would you use a tree jack? Well, again, this is a validation or a gut check method. So you do it when you have an idea of what the IA should be. You also do it after the categories or the groupings have been established and perhaps tested through card sorting. And maybe when should you not use a tree jack test? Well, when you don't have high confidence in your IA, or when the visual clues, like we talked about, are really important for findability. So when you conduct a tree jack test, a person is given a task and a list of words where they expect to find the topic to complete the task. If your site's structure heavily relies on visuals for guidance, then a tree jack test might not be the best testing method for you. So there are a number of benefits of a tree jack test. You validate the IA through tasks or topics, not just having people organize things into categories. It shows how people can find things through the proposed structure. Through the methods we talked about before, this is the first time that they're actually going to go hunting for the info through the task. Topics can be several layers deep. So rather than the high level buckets that we were creating in a card sort, you could go down into 1 or 2, maybe 3 child pages to identify where that object can be found. And basically a tree jack test shows you where they expect to find the info. If they go down a different path, you're going to see that test result too. And that's really important information to have as well. But there are some challenges when it comes to conducting a tree test. There are no visual clues like images or buttons. There's just words. So if visual elements are needed for findability, this may not be the test for you. There's no visual hierarchy on a website. Again, a participant is just seeing a list of words to click down into to see where they think this item would be found. And since most are unmoderated, you often won't have that context as to why they chose the path that they did. And finally, this method usually allows for 1 or 2 final answers. And sometimes things could be found in more than one place. So if they have designated to go into one place, you won't see that they actually thinks it could go in another. So you might not get that kind of extra knowledge. So I have one more challenge for you when it comes to conducting a tree jack test. There is one more challenge, and that is the method is not really easily done without some specialized software like Optimal Workshop or User Zoom. So if you don't have any of these kind of tools, this may not be the method for you also. So now that we understand a bit more about the tools, let's look about how to conduct a tree jack test. First, determine the hierarchy of items you want to test. You must know all the parent-child relationships. So let's look at this example. The parent pages here are palms, citrus, and berries. The child pages are underneath those. Like, so for example, berries is the parent page and strawberries and raspberries are the child pages of that parent page, berries. This is what your structure looks like when you upload it into one of those online tools like Optimal Workshop. You want to see what happens when the user is given a task. And the task I came up with was, where would you go to find a strawberry? Also, it's okay to have some ideas of alternative places that a topic might be found. You can include that in the test, but we did that in the activity we're going to go through here in a little bit. You might just discover an alternative place during the analysis too. You thought everybody should go here, but a lot of people went to this other place, and you'll be able to see that through the analysis. Okay, so a little bit more about writing tasks. Make sure you're not using any words that might lead the participant down a path. Do not say you want to donate some money if the word donation is in your navigation. People will look for words and click down into that just because the words match. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. Well, strawberry has the word berries in it. Well, that's true, but that's the name of the fruit. So it is what it is in this example. I can't help that. So you want to write out all the tasks for the participant to complete. And I would say no more than 10 tasks. We don't want to give them too many because it can be overwhelming to complete the test, and they start to learn the structure after a few tries. So the last step is to prepare to set up for the test, and you build a spreadsheet with the hierarchy and upload that into the tool. And so how this helps define your IA is is that you see if the users can actually find your content. You've conducted the necessary card sorting exercises. You've had your participant group the item into ways that make sense. Now you want to see if they have successful hunting. This is especially true when you have multiple child levels that a person might need to go into deeper. And you have the major categories. Now, did the structure of the items within those major categories in a way, does that make sense? So let's walk through the results of a tree jack test and how they look in Optimal Workshop. First, let me clarify that this is not what the participant sees. This is for you, the UX Pro, the person giving the test. This is for you to analyze the paths that the user took. So the task here is, where would you find a strawberry? The starting point is the middle of this pie, what's it called? Pie, what do they call it? I always forget the name. Pie tree. That's the starting point right here in the middle. And then each circle that comes outside of it is the first level down. So for this example, the home is the top level, and the first level down is berries, palms, exotic, and citrus. This particular test only goes down one level, but if it went down multiple, then there'd be another ring of circles outside of that. The bigger the circle, the more people went down that path. And the successful paths are the ones where the researcher administering the test indicate the user should go down. And they're represented by that green circle. So for in this example, one successful path was berries because it's got that green circle. So this is how we visually know this is what we said is where they should go. And so as you can see, some people went down some other paths. Some went down palms, some went down citrus, some went down exotic. Now this is interesting because if a lot of people went down those other paths to look for things, this might be something important to note, right? We think they should go to berries, but everyone else thinks, I should go here. That's a finding. So let's talk about what you do to analyze the results. You see what paths had the most success and see what alternative paths the people took. Determine whether a topic should be placed maybe in more than one location in your site or your app. See if there's any strong second place contenders. See if the path they took disagrees with your intended path. Consider what it would be like with less depth or children pages. Consider what it would be like with more depth or children pages. Could the task or question maybe have led them down the wrong path? Did you bias them by the language that you used in your task? I would recommend that you retest items that are not successful with a different structure. And like with any other testing, it won't be strictly black and white, but this is a little bit easier to analyze than a card sort. So once you've determined which tasks are successful or not, share that with your team and maybe discuss some further testing options.
Jen, what question?
So, yes.
Real quick. Is this possible to do with call to actions or is just navigation?
With what?
Like call to actions. Wording for call to actions.
You mean to test the language on a call to action, or?
Yes.
I mean, I guess it could. In a sense, you're trying to determine if they would go, like you would give them a task and then you could test the language on your call to action to see which one they would go down. But you wouldn't likely test. I'm not really sure if you would want to test multiple language, right? Like if you're trying to test which one makes sense, that might be not as a natural thing because it could be confusing. I don't know. I haven't really thought of it that way, to be honest. I haven't done it that way. Anybody else here have any experience of testing a call to action through a tree jack test? I haven't done that, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
I think it's probably you test that just using scenario task. You don't necessarily put the call to action in the tree, but you ask them, you want to do this, and you can include the call to action text in the scenario that you are presenting, and then you let them go wherever they think that might be found in this particular type of test.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So we are a little bit behind on time. So for this last activity, I'm probably going to walk us through it a little bit more rather than have us dive into the mural and asking and doing the questions. So now that you're a little bit more familiar with the tool, let's talk about what we're going to do in this activity. So we're going to look at some things on Mural and we're going to think about some questions that I'm going to ask you some questions we're going to do some quick tree jack analysis. So the task is the task here, this is what we're going to look at, is you're going to make a stir fry and the recipe calls for bok choy. So where would you go to find this item? And I gave it 2 success paths. I said leafy greens and I said green vegetables. So these are the 2 at the top. Here you can see leafy greens and green vegetables. This is just indicating that's what the tool, the success paths are. So remember how we talked about this earlier. We saw that bok choy was grouped together a lot with veggies like, like cabbage and spinach in our card sort. And so we were going to give it the label of leafy greens, but then our stakeholder wanted bok choy to be called green vegetables. Remember that? So we had that twist. And so we were going to test to see which results were stronger. Well, the number in the purple next to the circle is the number of people they thought that's where they would find the item. So for this example, 14 people thought bok choy would be found in roots. Now, this is the pie chart that we're going to look at a little bit in Mural, but instead of us filling in the stickies, let's just go ahead and discuss it. So Lana, if you want to take us to Mural or bring it up on your screen and share it so that we can just kind of look at it, I think that would be a good start. So if you want to bring us to the place in Mural so we can see. All right, maybe zoom in at the top there. So let's look at let's look at this chart here in Mural a little bit closer, just the chart itself. And let's talk about this out loud. So based on what we're looking at here, where did people go the most? Anybody have any thoughts?
Leafy greens?
Yeah, Kind of looks like that's where they went the most. Yeah, Lana, can you zoom in just on the chart a little bit closer so that we can just really see the chart? Thank you so much. Yeah, so is that what we expected based on what we defined as a success criteria? Anybody have any thoughts? Yes, no?
So yeah, the stakeholders wanting to put green vegetables, so you wanted to just test if that was going to work well as well.
Exactly. So yeah. So where else did they go besides leafy greens and green vegetables?
They went
Roots,
to roots, onions, and squash.
Where else?
Okay. Yeah. So does any of this surprise you? Anybody surprised by where people went?
Well, I mean, roots and onions, but it could be that they didn't know what bok choy was. I actually have a question that I kind of put it in the chat, but it goes to the confusion between green vegetables and maybe not confusion, but green vegetables and leafy greens. At what point do you determine that that's like, that is like a confused, or how should I say this? As the second best path, if it's not correct or sorry, I'm not describing it correctly. So if you have like a second best, at what point is that metric not useful? Like, do you have to do this again? Or like the findings of the test is successful. Does that make sense, Jen?
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's kind of something that's something that your team needs to decide. Really, I can't tell you. It won't be the same. There's not a specific threshold that I could give you that, oh, 1/3 difference or something like that. There's a number of things that could happen here. Bok choy could be placed in leafy greens because that's the clearer winner, perhaps. It could be placed in both if we find that that's what the stakeholder need really requires, or if that's going to be the most helpful for the findability. It just kind of depends on your team would have to kind of decide that. Or you might retest again without green vegetables being there and seeing, or without leafy greens being there and see what those results look like. Was it really everyone clearly understood that that's the answer? So I wish I could give you a specific threshold cutoff, but that's something that you and your team would probably want to determine amongst yourselves. There's a lot of factors to weigh in on that decision that I'd kind of be out of the context of knowing. Does that, I know that's not a very helpful answer, but that.
No, that's perfectly fine. I was just wondering if there was some kind of metric you usually use or not, but it sounds like it's, it depends.
Yeah, the old it depends. So based on this data, what would your let's say you're the researcher and you've conducted this test, what would your recommendations be? Anybody have any thoughts?
I would go ahead with the leafy greens. I mean, you did the card sort and people sort of put bok choy in that grouping, and then here you are doing the tree test again, and leafy greens is sort of the standout. So I would go with that, and based on also what the team thinks as well.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, so much of it is based on what the team requires. There might be specific requirements that the testing results can inform you, but they're not always a direct linear, this is the way it's going to happen, right? So these are things that you have the data to support a recommendation. Is that always going to be adopted? Not 100% of the time, unfortunately.
I would suggest, if possible, that to look at the data a little closer to see if there are any segments that might be looking at this in a different way, because you have two groups there with the green vegetables and leafy greens to see if there's anything specific to the people that are selecting green vegetables that need to be paying attention to, or just to understand why they're going that route, if there is anything, relevant to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So ultimately with this test, you want to, I'm getting asked a question about my Mac. No, thank you. Sorry about that. So ultimately what you would provide some recommendations. So it sounds like your recommendations would be, we think we should move forward with leafy greens. So what would some next steps be, perhaps? This is a recommendation. Would there be any next steps after this? Anyone?
I think it would probably depend upon what you end up discussing with your team. Like, it's not a clear cut next step. It's a, okay, this is what I found. What do we think? Should we just go with leafy green? Do we need more research? And that, I think that it's not going to be an easy answer.
Yeah, I think that's
It's often a matter of budget and timing.
I actually also wonder
exactly
if the fact that we have two such similarly labeled groups confuse people. Because it would have me. They've been like,
fair.
What?
That's a good point. That's a good point. So maybe you would do a test without, you could do 2 more tests, taking each one off and see what happens, right? Yeah, that's a good point. All right, great. So I am going to, let me share my screen. I'm going to wrap up today's talk. I know we're at getting close to time, and I apologize. I just have a few more things, and we'll get through them as quickly as possible. I understand if you have to drop off early, but let's go ahead and dive on through. So let's wrap up testing for information architecture with a method I hope many here are at least somewhat familiar with, and that's a usability test. So thumbs up in the reactions or the video if anybody here has done a usability test, familiar with that? Sure. Looks like a lot of people. Excellent. So a usability test is not only conducted to see if a person can complete a task, you can also use a usability test to understand findability when a participant goes through a task, right? So as the person conducting the test on a prototype, you give them a task and see if they can complete it. It's that simple. And part of that is seeing if they can find where to complete it. So one quick note about testing information architecture, test whether you add, take away, or adjust your product site. If you're adding navigational items or taking them away, you also want to test with a prototype or test with these other methods we talked about today, because don't just assume just because you plug in another thing that's still as findable as it was the last time you tested. Adding things or taking them away can significantly adjust your information architecture. So do make sure that you test all along the way whenever you're doing those kinds of things. So when do you use a prototype to test? Well, at this point, you should have pretty high confidence of your IA through the previous testing methods that we talked about today. So conduct a usability test to validate your design. And so when would you not use it? Well, again, a usability test should come toward the end of the design process, right? So you don't want to do this as your only IA research method, if you can, especially when you don't know when the IA should be, or when you don't know where the items should be found. And if you don't have tasks for users to complete, you wouldn't have a prototype. And obviously you can't conduct a usability test with a prototype if you don't have a prototype. So you kind of need to make sure you have one. So the good thing about a usability test is now you have the visual clues and the page hierarchy to help the user find things. Your design is closer to real activities a person might conduct on a site or a product. Plus, you can often find other usability or content or design issues during a usability test. Finally, if you moderate these usability tests, it's a great way to get some context around why they expect things to be in certain locations. But like I said before, a prototype is required. You need to be careful not to include leading or biased questions that could bring poor results. And like many of you know, this may not feel like a complete real experience. If the tasks aren't real to the person that you're asking to conduct them, they might struggle. So make the tasks as real as they can be to that person, right? They might fake it if that's not something that they don't really normally do. So there are a number of tools that you can use to create mock-ups for usability tests. And I'm not going to do a deep dive here. What I do want to point out that is you can use low-res design, even PowerPoint or Keynote to test a prototype. You don't have to have fancy design tools. So let's talk a little bit about the process when it comes to conducting a usability test for IA. I recommend that you work with a researcher to help you create a usability plan. I recommend that through any of these testing methods, actually. Determine which items you want the participant to find. I recommend that you limit the tasks, no more than 5 or 6, because they start to learn the interface and the options after going through a few tasks. So don't do too many with one person. Determine how you will word the tasks without bias or leading the witness. Have a coworker double check. This goes with all of them. I always have Lana check my stuff too to make sure that second set of eyes that I haven't injected some bias or some leading questions. And then build out the prototype with all the paths of the solutions that they might go down with that task. And simply ask the participant to complete a task one at a time and record where they go. Also note their reactions, their comments, their wrong turns, their concerns. All of that stuff is really context gold. So how does a usability test help define your site or your product's information architecture? Well, first, it confirms that users can find the items on your site in the actual design. It also confirms that users understand labels enough to find the items. It can show where users struggle and where they hesitate. It provides context for usability and findability issues. And hey, you can use the same prototype for other tests. So that is a win-win. So after the test, what do you do with the findings to confirm a good information architecture? Well, many things to consider are similar to what you look for in a tree jack study. See the places they went the most and the alternative paths. Are there strong second place contenders? Should items be placed in more than one location? Are the paths they took agreeing with your intended path? Consider what it would be like to change some of the labels or change where it's located on the page. Consider what it would be like with more depth or less depth. And retest those questionable tasks. If somebody struggled, update the design and test again until you feel more confident that they can find the things that they need. And once you've validated the IA through tasks and visual design, you share that with your team. And you're now very close, if you're not already there, to a design that will work for users. You should feel pretty pleased you've tested the content to align with your users' mental models at this point. So, before I wrap up today's talk, I want to point out a few resources where you can learn more about information architecture. So these are some important people to the IA world. Richard Saul Warman is credited with coming up with the term information architecture in relationship to designing information. Peter Moorfield and Lou Rosenfeld wrote the Bible of IA, information architecture for the World Wide Web and beyond. And Abby Covert, who's also a sponsor of World IA Day and is giving away copies of her book today, she is the author of How to Make Sense of Any Mess, which is a great book. I recommend it. Again, the book's here. I talked about the information architecture for the World Wide Web and beyond. This is also known as the Polar Bear book. It is dense and thick with great information, but a must if you want to learn about information architecture. And Abby's book, How to Make Sense of Any Mess, I think you have that's part of your swag potential if you're promoting on social media. You can get a copy of that if you win. And Card Sorting, Designing Usable Categories by Donna Spencer. Donna Spencer is what I call the card sort queen. So this is a great book. And Don't Make Me Think, revisited by Steve Krug. It's a classic test on usability, a classic book on usability testing. And to me, it's a must to have in any UX person's toolkit, whether you're an information architect or not. This is a great read. So you've done all this testing. Now what? Well, each level of testing is refining plus validating with users. Conducting this research gets everyone out of the assumption zone and makes sure the information architecture on the page or the site makes sense to users, not just stakeholders. You want to have confidence that the wording makes sense to users, and this is why you ask them to select labels on the open card sort. It's good that items have been tested with and without page structure and visual guidance. You do this to see if the wording and the labels make sense. See if the words can stand alone. This is why you conducted a tree jack test, to make sure the word opens the door, in a sense, for the user to continue the journey on findability. You've tested the designs with a prototype, this time bringing in all the visual clues like location on the page, images, buttons to guide the user forward. As you can see, you've done a lot of testing and validating with users to build the navigation and the taxonomy. I would peg you an information architecture superhero. To summarize, we've given you the testing and research skills to take back these methods and apply them to what you're working on now. And we hope you have the confidence to show that you are a IA superhero now. So don't worry, you've got this. Take these skills back to what you're working on and build better products. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? I know I didn't address some of your questions in the chat. Like I mentioned, I wasn't following the chat. Hopefully one of our co-hosts and volunteers were able to present to answer some of those, but happy to have a discussion. We're here to answer questions or have a discussion if anybody has anything to bring up.
I have a question for you, Jen. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I have a question about prototyping. There's so many remote prototyping tools out there now. Like, do you have a favorite, or do you like? Do you have a preference?
I don't. I haven't used a remote usability testing tool in quite some time because my users are in-house, and so I haven't personally used one. Does anybody have? I think user testing was a good one from what I can recall using in the past. Does anybody have one that they recommend?
You can try Loop 11, which you can do moderated and unmoderated. They don't have the user testing platform has included the sample capabilities, so you recruit through them. But if you can recruit your own users, you go through another sampling source. Loop 11, it's much more affordable. Many people cannot afford user testing, which is a big subscription model, but we have used that.
Did you say Look 11? Can you type that out?
LOOP 11 number.
Okay, thank you.
.com. They're in Australia.
Cool. Thanks, Michaela. Brenda?
Yeah, the question that I have is, do you have any suggestions to start the current information architecture, kind of like a mapping, and then based on that start the card sorting, like kind of like a step behind the card sort, just to map what it is right now, the website?
Yeah, you definitely want to do a content analysis to see what you have, and you can use other tools like analytics to see places where people are going, search terms that they're using, because if somebody is using a search term often on your site, that means it could mean a couple things. 2, they want it a lot, so they're just searching for it. And 1, they can't find it, so they're having to search for it. So looking at those search analytics can help you also determine topics that should be potentially include it in a card sort because they're searching for it a lot. Either they can't find it or they know they know they want it. So that's a start. But yeah, you definitely want to see where your site is now, and then do look at the analytics if there's parts of the site that people are not going to, but your stakeholders think this is a really important thing. Why aren't they going here? That might be another opportunity for you to be testing or getting some information around that information architecture, because maybe they're not going there because they can't find it. It's behind some door, behind some label that users don't know that that's where that leads.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I just wanted also to mention that for those that may not have the budget to buy tools or may have more time, the area that where you can do yourself some work, but ideally you should do it with somebody else too, with a team, to be able to check on bias, is the actual coding. You can do manual coding of those labels once you get the groupings, when you start doing those overlapping. That's what we do in qualitative research, open-ended coding. It's the same principle. You just probably have to go through different rounds just to reiterate and make sure that biases are checked in. So we do a round, we send it to another person, then does another round. And so kind of massage it, come up with a more condensed list if you don't have optional, workshop and all that. So it's doable. It's just more work. It's more intense. There are software that can do that for you for open-ended coding testing. You do that with surveys, but it's a lot of manual work if you can do that too.
Thanks.
I have a question about the tree jack tests and base sizes. What is that something that's typically done with a larger, more quantitative base size, or have you used it with just smaller qual base sizes before?
Good question, Tracy. I've done both. I've even actually done a couple moderated. If somebody I knew, get on a Zoom with them, share the link with them, have them go through the tree jack test and have them talk through why they're making. That's definitely something you want to think aloud. Like, I'm thinking of going down this path and here's why, and kind of understanding a little bit of the context. But it really can be both. I think because it's so simple and it's a lot simple in a sense that it's not super time consuming to complete a tree jack test compared to a card sort, that I tend to get a better response for a tree jack test because it's like 5 minutes, boom, 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 and it's done. So you can do both. As as they say, some user feedback, some testing is better than none. So if you can only have a small amount, go with that. But it definitely can be a quantitative. It's designed to be a quantitative method in a sense that it's an online tool and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
And we can open it to general chit chat topics that are not IA related, if you'd like. A lot of times, for those who may have attended a UX research strategy event before, we like to have sometimes called happy hour, but we just kind of hang out for a little bit afterwards for those who are interested to kind of network or just ask questions, or just general UX questions. You're welcome to stay around for that as well, or post questions, because a lot of times not just the speakers but other members of the audience have some helpful insights that might answer some questions. So welcome to do that too if you're interested.
I have a question. If you are, I'm working in an academic setting and I'm doing like a school site redesign, and I'm trying to find out the best practices on having like the sub navigation menus. I understand that they should be child pages, if you're coming into like the English program, and these are, like requirements or, things, electives, things like that. But what about some links that you want to have that are not going to be related? It's not a child page of that page. How do you put those in a way that the user can find them, but they're not in that side navigation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How would you test that through like a tree jack test? Is that your question?
Well, what I kind of came up with was, keep exploring. And I have a menu that's like called keep exploring. I'm trying to find a way for my users that go to this part of the site thinking they're going to find what they're looking for. It's not there, but how else can I present that in a way that they can find it, then they can get back to what they're trying to, the task they're trying to accomplish, like other cues, other ways to get them back to what they're trying to do. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, I assume there's be a search on your site so that they might be able to search for things. There could be related articles either in a sidebar, maybe toward the end, that they could click on for more information if you're trying to take them down a side path. Is that what you're kind of asking about?
Yeah, when I do when I was doing some research, and I just use Teams, and I have like students work, I tell them task, and they go through a site. This is something that's already kind of in a testing stage, so I can have them actually on the testing site. Sometimes, they won't go through the right, they won't find what they're needing, and I'm trying to find ways to on ramp them back to, other than search, which I know you could do, maybe some things in the footer, just other ways to try to get them kind of get them back to what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Always having the tap navigation accessible and a footer accessible is a good way to get somebody to wayfind back to the home or back to where they were. So those are some pieces of navigation that are proving to be helpful to have on every page, right? Because not every user will enter a site through your homepage. They will come in through some side door. So having a master navigation, whether it be on the top or the side, and I'm a fan of a mega footer because I know sometimes I will just scroll down and scan a large footer knowing that I'm looking for a specific word, but may not find it in the top navigation. So having those on every page is a good way to get people back to a central point.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I have a question about the number for card sorting as far as like number of cards. I know it's been recommended 50 is the maximum, but in one case I had this huge site that had way more than that. And I think, if I remember, we had to do as a compromise that I had to sit down with stakeholders and then just cross a lot of them off, try and find ones that seemed kind of duplicate. Because I knew otherwise, if you have too many cards, user fatigue, or they start guessing, or whatever. So, but obviously that's not ideal. Is there a better way of dealing with huge sites that are like that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of that, Linda, don't you? Like, if
Yeah.
you don't want to overwhelm them with too many cards because you just won't. You could wear them out, and then you're just going to you're going to get pardon my French, half-assed answers because they're completing it because they're too tired. So you might need to segment your tests into, I'm testing only this part of the site, or I'm only testing certain amount of depth, right? You might be maybe home, and then the second level down, you might just be testing each piece and the items within that, if that makes sense, without knowing the structure. I get it. Like, you're not always just testing navigation also, right? You might be testing pieces of a website and pieces of a form. You could test that, right? So how would they organize things? And if you give them too much, they're going to get tired, and you're not going to get good results, unfortunately.
Well, obviously in this case, it would have been better to do card sorting and tree jack before they came up with this site, but that's what you have to work with.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else have any questions, comments, general, hey, talk about this kind of stuff? No, I know it's early and it's been a long day, and I really appreciate everybody hanging on. I just want to point out we've thrown the survey in the chat, so we would love your feedback on this workshop, how it went for you, how we might improve it, any feedback or comments you have for this. And feel free to connect with other people who have been here today that left their LinkedIn information on the mural. We'll keep that up available to you so that you can connect with others. That's an important part of our community here, is we want to give network opportunities as well. So if nobody has any other questions or comments, I'll wrap it up so that our lovely friends in Europe, if they're still on, can go to bed. And those in the US can have a meal or go on to their next World IA Day event. Any last minute thoughts or shares or questions? We'll be posting the chat and the resources that were mentioned in the chat on the website, on the UX Research and Strategy website. Again, if you want to be entered into the raffle, please share photos, comments, experiences on your social media today so that we can find those using the hashtag UXRS for UX Research and Strategy or World IA Day. Last call.
Well, I think one last thought is, as Linda was mentioning, is make sure evangelize for AI testing. There's a lot of things that people really jump immediately to, let's do concept, user testing. And they just make a lot of assumptions that the terms are clear, the navigation is clear, we just need to design. And then you really have to take them back one step and say, wait a minute, let's check the assumptions about, the terms, the labels, the organization, because you don't want they get to the end and realize, like, I have been in tests like that. It's just, we go through the design, it's fine, but still people cannot find anything. It's not about necessarily the design. It's just the terms are unclear, confusing. They don't follow the mental models for the users. So you kind of have to put that as your first step, because you save a lot of time and money if you go that. You spend a little extra up front, to have to redo the whole thing later on.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right. Any other last minute questions, thoughts, shares? No? All right. Well, thank you all for attending. And it was great to see so many smiling faces. I appreciate cameras on for those who chose to do so. And we our next event is March 18th, learning about how to do a heuristic evaluation. So if you're interested in attending that, check us out on Eventbrite and we will see you there. Thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.